program. You can ask at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Aerospace workers in Washington state want the state legislature to tie $8.7 billion in tax incentives for Boeing to job protection and wage standards. SPIA IFPTE Local 2001's Bill Dugovich says if taxpayers are forking over billions to Boeing, wage guarantees in exchange for such huge corporate tax subsidies. Polling shows 2/3 of the state electorate agrees.
When Washington did this, it did not tie it to jobs or wage standards. And what happened next was the Boeing company, within weeks, started moving work away from Washington to other locations. And in some cases, it moved work to locations to secure another tax break from a different state. It is not right for the taxpayers of Washington state to see their tax dollars be used as an incentive to move work away.
Larry Brown, legislative and political director of IAM District Lodge 751, says giving away billions in tax incentives with no job retention or wage standards makes no sense for Washington state taxpayers.
We are at a competitive disadvantage to the states such as Missouri and South Carolina, which specifically state the number of jobs that are required in order to receive the tax incentive.
Dugovich says wage standards are needed not only for Boeing employees, but for other workers in the aerospace supply chain in Washington state.
In the supply chain, there are people who are making $10, $11, $12 an hour. And this at times has been after taking state assistant training programs so that they could have a career in aerospace. They pass the programs, they get a job in aerospace, and lo and behold, they're not making a living wage to support themselves or a family.
The Teamsters struck the Canadian Pacific Railroad Sunday over safety issues. The union says it's on strike to overcome the culture of fear initiated by CP management. Teamsters Canada Rail Conference President Douglas Finson says the labor talks have revealed just how severe the employer's concessionary demands really are. Picket lines are up across Canada. The Teamsters say they want to introduce effective and progressive fatigue countermeasures within their workplace without diminishing the collective agreement. Unifor, a union representing maintenance and safety workers, reached a last-minute agreement with Canadian Pacific. That agreement came just minutes before Unifor was also to go on strike.
Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, healthcare, and public services, students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This town gonna be here long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they still rise on. Oh, and this time is my time. All right, love or hate, it don't matter. So I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my time.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots of things to get to, lots to talk about. Pensions front and center. Liquor, going to talk about liquor because, that's what's really important. Never mind the crumbling infrastructure, never mind our schools. Me first, me. And a lot of that today, a lot of the me first stuff, especially coming from our friends in the GOP. And look, what I've always said, the Republicans are showing their true nature. Their true nature is they are unable to govern in a democratic fashion. The idea of American diplomacy, American democracy, something completely foreign to them. Most of them dictatorship because they want to run things like corporate America. Understand, corporate America is not a democracy, no matter what people think. It's not. I know. Oh, but the shareholders get votes. Yeah, you know how those shareholders votes are weighted? By who has the most money. That's the world that they want to bring us to. Those with the most money have the most votes. If you have more money to buy more votes, you have more money. You have more power and more say. And that's what they really want. There's no surprise here. And as we go through issue after issue, because, look, West Virginia under attack, prevailing wage, they're pursuing a right to work, no rights at work agenda. Same thing in Illinois. The people who are saying that they're running for president are all taking the, basically the corporate line of, corporations need everything. Let's give them more. And what about everyone else? What about the working people of this country? It's going to be an interesting couple of years, I think, because there's a lot of stuff going on. And here in the first couple of months of this year, going to be very interesting to see what happens. With an overwhelmingly Republican General Assembly, both the House and Senate overwhelmingly in control of Republicans. The House a little crazier than the Senate, but not a lot more. They're a little more off to the fringe, but because of the wider margin and the ability of the crazies to kind of take over. And the Senate a little different, but still decidedly in the hands of not the rest of us. The priorities, what I expect to see, not things that any of us want. For me, front and center, the first thing is you go back to what Governor Wolf ran on. We're going to tax the drillers. We're going to fund education. That was what the people of this Commonwealth overwhelmingly want. Overwhelmingly. Yet, I don't know that we're going to get to that because liquor is coming up. We're going to go back and we're going to refight the last 4 years again. And they're going to try and ram through liquor, and it'll pass through the House and it may pass through the Senate, but it's going to get vetoed at the desk. That's going to happen. Because this governor really understands why, because he's a businessman. Understand this. This is where Corbett didn't have that street cred. He wasn't. He wasn't a quote unquote job creator. This guy sitting in the governor's mansion today is, and has articulated on numerous occasions why maintaining control of the state wine and spirit shops are vital in the interests of the Commonwealth. And not selling off bits and pieces of it, not splitting it off and splitting it off in a way so that the public side of it dies. Because that's part of this as well. Down the road, we'll partially privatize it. We'll sell off all the really good stuff, and then the people, can have all that crap we've been hanging around. Because the private sector doesn't want it. Look, if you live in a rural county, sorry, you're just not going to have the volume to have a wine and spirit shop. You'll have a gas station that may have a couple of things in it, and what you get are Ripple and one kind of beer, and you'll be grateful for it, which is nuts. But I look at this, and this whole push towards privatization, this whole push towards me first, is scary. Because there are a lot of things out there that need to be done. And we're going to hear an awful lot about pensions here in the next, up until budget time. I mean, we're going to hear about this pension issue, which, they keep throwing out is, we've got this unfunded mandate of $1 gazillion. And, everything, it's due right now. And for me, as someone who considers myself somewhat literate and somewhat, thoughtful, and able to understand, some economic principles and some thoughts and basic finance. The idea that, money is almost dirt cheap right now. And for a while it was free. Interest wise, you could borrow it at cost and pay it back over the next 10 or 20 years with no interest. And you go, why would you do that? Because we're insane. because we're gripped by this insanity that has grabbed the mass of the Republican Party and a good portion of the Democratic Party. Balanced budgets, gotta have balanced budgets. Yeah. At a time of crisis. Nice job, genius. And to me, it's always been about creating the next crisis so that, mission accomplished. The Republicans got everything they wanted. We tightened the belt, we tightened the belt, we tightened the belt. We gave corporations more and more and more, and we accepted less and less. Under the frame of that they're the producers and everybody else is they're the takers or the mooches or the parasites. And we the parasites have to tighten the belt. And I've been screaming for years, wake up, wake up, wake up. Because what we're being shoveled is a bunch of nonsense. And what we're going to hear over the next couple of months is that we need to, and it has to happen because our pension system is so broken. We're gazillions of dollars in the hole, and it will cause birth defects in the next generation if we don't do it now. I mean, that's how they're going to paint this thing. When the reality is, there's a pension problem. It's not a crisis. Not any rational, thoughtful person knows, not a crisis. There's some things that need to be done, and a lot of it was done in Act 120. It just takes time to allow these things to work themselves out. Nothing is done overnight. What the solution that the Republicans have come to us with this crisis that they've created, because understand, for about a decade, both the Republicans and the Democrats didn't fund the pensions. So it's about a decade underfunded. And then, of course, the Bush collapse caused a huge problem there as well. And then you got greedy politicians who, they didn't want to give raises. And this is part of this. They didn't want to raise taxes by giving raises to workers. So the workers said, we'll take lower wages today in exchange for a better retirement so that our pensions are a little bit better off. So we took the money that we would have enjoyed today, the money that we would have put in our pockets and spent today, and we'll push it off down the road so that we're secure in retirement. This is compensation that these folks were paid or are supposed to be paid. And now you've got these Republicans who are running around saying we need to renege on that promise, on that contract that we signed, and basically screw these people. And you go, well, okay, if it works, I've had a lot of people say, well, if it works, big problem. According to the National Institute on Retirement Security, they have found, and I guess to any thoughtful person, no big surprise, that the states that have done what the Republicans here in Pennsylvania are telling us they want to do, states like Alaska, West Virginia, and Michigan, which is to dump the defined plan, screw that, we're dumping that, no more, and start a 401k kind of plan, or something called a defined contribution. And for those of us who lived through the 80s and 90s, when corporate America did this, sounds like, well, it's, corporate America did it. Sounds like what we have to do to right the ship. The difference is that corporate America was basically able to write off their pensions and hand it over to the federal government and have the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, the PBGC, pick up about 40% of the pensions. So the workers got screwed, the government and the taxpayers got screwed, and the companies walked away grinning like a Cheshire cat, thrilled that they just got away with the heist of the year. Because in essence, they lowered their workers' wages considerably. They did away with any legacy costs that they may have had, and they were able to pocket the money that they stole from the pensions. Brilliant. Problem is, you can't do that in the public sector. Although, I'm sure that the corporatists in the Republican Party want that, you just can't. So here's the problem. When you move from this defined benefits plan that we currently have that says, when you retire here in Pennsylvania, I think the average is about $18,000 a year. You'll retire with about $18,000 a year. What they want to do is cut that off and put it into a defined contribution plan. What we've found out, according to the National Institute on Retirement Security, they have pointed out, and I guess any thoughtful person knows this, that the states that did this, the state governments that made the switch and predicted massive savings, actually lost money. And lots of it. In Alaska, they point out, in 2006, when they switched over, They switched all the new workers into this 401k. You get this wonderful, shining, piece of steaming dung. So you get this 401k kind of plan. And they, of course, because you couldn't screw the past workers out of their defined plan, they had a massive funding gap. In fact, from about 2006 to last year, they went from about $6 billion in unfunded liability up to 12. And in 2014, Alaska made a $3 billion cash infusion into the defined benefit just to kind of shore it up a little bit. And what's interesting is, according to the article, one problem in Alaska, critics of the switch said, was that the old pension plan still had to pay out pension benefits to people hired before 2008. The people who had worked all those years and built up a pension. Yeah. And what happened is the people who were newly hired, they weren't being paid into the system. And I guess this is the fundamental misunderstanding of how a defined benefit system works. We all like to think that there's an account with our name on it. That's not what happens. You throw all this money into a big pot, and that big pot, it fluctuates with the roll of Wall Street. But in the end, you end up with a guaranteed benefit. Because as the new workers come on, they continue to pay in to make up for shortfalls, and we allow it to grow so that you have surpluses, and then you can maybe offer a little bit better benefits, things like that. And what's frustrating to me is you've got a bunch of politicians running around screaming, this is the way to go. Why? Because that's what corporate America did. And it's insane. Now, there is one of these sites out there, the John and Laura Arnold Foundation, who are just ballistic against defined benefit pensions. Understand, John Arnold is a billionaire hedge fund manager who runs this John and Arnold Foundation, John and Laura Arnold Foundation. And I would wonder, and just a thought before we go, why do you think a hedge fund manager would want to undo a defined benefit plan and move into a defined contribution plan? That's right. All the fees that Wall Street gets to steal from each person who has a defined contribution plan. You got to see, you're smart. That's why you listen. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. A current question is which workers are entitled to union representation? Who really gets counted as a worker, and who decides wages, hours, and conditions? These were the questions that divided the campus of Yale University. On this day in labor history, the year was 1992. The Graduate Employee Student Organization on campus began a 3-day strike. They were supported by Locals 34 and 35, part of the Hotel and Restaurant Employees International Union, who represented the clerical workers, dining service staff, and technical and maintenance workers at Yale University, as well as the dietary workers at Yale New Haven Hospital. These workers stood in solidarity with the graduate employees and walked out in a show of support. They recognized the important work the graduate employees did for the university, including teaching classes and grading papers. Yet, Yale administrators argued the graduate employees' primary role was that of the student, and they were therefore not entitled to union representation. The year before, the graduate students had held a 1-day strike, but did not gain union recognition. As a result of the 1992 strike, some graduate students received improved funding. They also received inclusion on the Yale Executive Committee, an administrative body. Yet, they were again denied the right to be in a union. Another strike 3 years later had the same result. Today, there are 31 recognized graduate student unions in the United States. There are 18 that remain unrecognized. One of these is at Yale University. Today, universities more and more seek to cut costs by having graduate students and adjuncts teach courses. These workers are paid far less than tenured professors, and they are increasingly turning to the idea of unionization. The question remains, will they be recognized as real workers, and will they have a say in their wages, hours, and conditions? Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. In his recent request for an authorization for the use of military force against ISIS, President Obama expressed his opposition to engaging in, quote, another prolonged ground war in the Middle East, which he said is not in our national security interest. But if you listen to Fox News' Gretchen Carlson, you would think the president had said something else entirely. Here's how she distorted President Obama's claim that U.S. ground troops are not necessary to defeat ISIS.
Battling ISIS abroad, it's a war of words here at home over strategy and the use of American ground troops. The president may have more clarifying to do after saying that we have no national security interest in this fight, despite constant threats to American lives, like Kayla Mueller.
Carlson continued.
What did President Obama mean yesterday when he said that it's not in our interest to defeat ISIL? Huh?
But the truth is that while Obama claimed that a prolonged ground war was, quote, not in our national security interest, he expressed that, quote, our core objective is to destroy ISIL. That doesn't sound like he said it's not in our interest to defeat ISIL to us. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous. The salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Rebuilding America. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Well, it looks like the walls came tumbling down today. Former treasurer Rob McCord, who I liked. I got to be honest. I'll put that right out there. He was on the program a number of times during his run for the Democratic nomination there for governor for the in the primary. I liked the guy. I didn't think he had a snowball's chance of winning. But I'm saddened by this. It's just horrible. Pled guilty today. Could possibly face 40 years in prison and a $500,000 fine. And I'm going, wow. And when I told my wife that, she goes, rapists don't even get 40 years. And I go, well, this is what happens when you, the public trust. I mean, that's something I think that is very important. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about what's going on in the big city of Harrisburg and what we can expect over the next couple of weeks and months. Our good friend Abe Amoros, Pennsylvania Legislative Director for LiUNA. Abe, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So what do you think of this? 40 years, potentially 40 years.
Yeah, Rick, the circumstances are really tragic. I mean, this was an up-and-coming elected official who had won statewide office on 2 separate occasions, made a decent run for the governor's office, although some may argue that point. But he was a rising star, very likable guy, very knowledgeable. And I do believe that the judge is going to make an example out of him because of the 2 words you mentioned in your intro, public trust. I do believe that they're going to come down hard on him. I hope that's not the case because, like you, I like him quite a bit. I mean, he's a decent fella. I don't know what he was thinking when he did this. To his credit, however, he owned up to it immediately, pleaded guilty, and didn't deny anything that took place. So it's going to be interesting to see what the judge hands down, but I do believe that he's going to be poised to make an example out of him because of this culture of corruption that we have in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I mean, just sad stuff. And, not the kind of things that we need at this time when the public's, belief in government is at really a historic low. To have something like this pop up, it's just frustrating.
It really is, Rick. And again, it's sad, it's tragic at so many levels because he did have greatness within his grasp at one point. But when you see things taking place like this, it just reminds you of the human aspect of public service, but also reminds public servants that they actually have to adhere to higher standards. People are watching them. This is all in the public domain. Nobody gets a pass. It doesn't matter how many good deeds you do. You've got to keep it clean the entire time because you're dealing with taxpayer dollars, and the public deserves better.
I'm with you. And I wish him and his family the best out of this situation and all of that. But it's just really sad. So let's figure out what's going on. I understand next week liquor is going to be coming around. We're gonna privatize our liquor stores, huh?
Oh, geez, Rick. You know the House. Let me tell you, Mike Turzai is just on the warpath, the Speaker of the House, the former Majority Leader, who is just absolutely mindset. I mean, dead set on eliminating the current system, which is working quite fine. Thank you very much. And I understand that there are going to be some other bills in the Senate that are working to modernize the state system and improve upon it rather than eliminate it like Turzai says. I mean, what he's doing is absolutely ridiculous. What he wants to do is just wants to phase it out over time, wants to sell a bunch of licenses. He says it's going to raise about $2.5 billion. But again, I've asked this question on your program many times, Rick. Why would you trade $529 million every year going back into the general fund for a one-time infusion? What happens in the 6th year? What happens in the 7th year? And why would you want to put all those people out of work? I mean, these are good-paying, family-sustaining jobs. I mean, these are good wages with health care benefits, with pension benefits. Why would you want to put those people out on the street? They're very knowledgeable about their product, and they're good at customer service. I mean, I don't get it, Rick. This guy's off his rocker.
Well, I think it's pure Machiavellian politics. I mean, this is goring your political enemy in public. It's nothing more than that, because I don't know where you get the $2.5 billion. Where'd that come from again? Which orifice did he pull that out of?
Yeah, you know what, Rick? I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's a very good point, because you can't go by the Republican talking points on this. And I've seen 3 different figures, as a matter of fact. But he seems to clamp onto that $2.5 billion, and because it makes it sound a lot better than it is. But again, you're dealing with real people out there, and you're talking about a system that is currently working just fine, gives back to the general fund. It is self-sustaining. You can't ask for anything else. The selection is great. The prices are very reasonable. The quality products that they sell. I mean, you're just going to eliminate all that if you give a guy on a corner a license to sell, a dark rum, a white rum, and some beer, and then they're not going to have the safeguards in place for underage drinking. I mean, this is absolutely ludicrous. But Mike Turzai is on a warpath on this.
Yeah, I mean, as I've said, it's his fetish. And when you think in those terms, all the blood leaves your head, and you end up with what you end up with.
That's right, Rick. I mean, it just makes you dizzy when you think about it, because it makes absolutely no sense. And the fact that he's so tenacious, he is like a hungry dog on a bone. He will not leave this alone, and he's holding all kinds of other things hostage in terms of legislation. And, the people of Pennsylvania deserve a heck of a lot better than what he's providing in terms of leadership, because it's just the same broken record over and over again on privatization of the state stores. And it's crazy. The wine and spirit shops are doing just fine. They don't need to have them eliminated. They just need to be improved upon with modernization. I mean, let's invest in making it better and more efficient, because right now it's doing fine, but it could always do a little bit better, obviously. And the Senate proposals, I think, do that. And I do think if this passes in the House, because it did already, Rick, House Bill 570 passed 2 sessions ago.
Right.
Actually, it was last session 2 years ago. And, there's a good chance that it's going to pass again. So we're going to have to call upon our friends, our reasonable Republican friends in the Senate, to stop this. And I believe that the votes are there to stop it. But we're going to waste a lot of valuable time going over privatization when we should be talking about filling that $2.5 billion, $2.25 billion structural deficit that the governor was left with when he came in office.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I mean, you can pass it in the House, you can pass it in the Senate. The governor's still going to veto it.
That's right, brother.
Here's a guy who, from a business standpoint, understands why it's important that we hold on to this asset. I mean, is incompetent as the Republicans seem on economic issues, it's amazing to me that businesses would support anything that they do. I mean, I look at the last 6 years. We have lost and a once in a century opportunity to rebuild our crumbling infrastructures, to rebuild our educational institutions, to invest in the future when money was basically free, when there was no. I remember reading a story a couple of years back where investors in Germany wanted to send money here just so it wouldn't be devalued. They didn't want any interest for it. They just wanted it to stay the same. And we could have borrowed tons of money to do the things that need to be done, and yet we let that opportunity go by.
That's right. And it's because of a lack of leadership, it's a lack of vision, and it's a lack of fundamental economic policies. And let me just get back to Turzai for a minute on that note, Rick. He was on PCN last week, the Pennsylvania Cable Network, and he made a bunch of egregious, just wrong comments based upon the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board and the wine and spirit shops. I mean, this is what they do to get away with it. They come up with these things, they put them on paper, they disseminate them to their members. Nobody fact checks them. And the news media is not doing a good job on fact checking these guys, so we've got to do it for them. He lies about the LCB being in the red for the last 10 years. He lies about the wine and spirit licenses. He lies about the money that it's generating. I mean, it's absolutely dreadful. But they get away with it on a daily basis because they have the spin machine, and that thing is purring at 100 miles an hour. You know, and it's something that we need to be aware of. We've got to be out there talking to folks and talking to our members, talking to our family members as well, and going to see our legislators. And, you know, we've got to see them in their district offices, Rick. I mean, when they go to the palace that's called the Capitol, they become different people. So it's better to see them in their district offices if ham and eggers are going to have any kind of impact.
Yeah, I mean, because I look at all of these bad economic policies that have really created what is going to be a major crisis in the next several years. Because the money that we were supposed to spend on rebuilding our infrastructure, now it's going to cost twice as much. And I know we passed a little bill a couple years back to help do some of that, and we've talked about it in the past. It was a good start. It's not enough, but it's a start. But you know, if you continually wait, those dollars that we've allocated don't go as far as had we done it a couple years back.
That's exactly right, Rick. That's why we have to make smart investments, key investments in a timely fashion. Invest today, so then you don't have to pay for the mistakes later. It's just that simple. Yet, again, we have a nearsighted legislature that's controlled and it's dominated by Republicans, and yet only a handful are reasonable voices within that caucus. And thankfully, they've been the ones that have been holding things together to ensure that nothing bad happens to our members. And so far it's worked, and I hope it keeps working, brother, because with those horrible majorities, anything can happen.
Last question I've got for you. You know, one of the big things I see coming up, obviously the pension issue. What are you hearing on the pension issue as you're walking the halls?
Well, I'll tell you, what they're doing right now is they're teeing up privatization. Then they're going to tackle, they're going to try to tackle the public pensions. What I hear is that they still don't have the votes for any kind of meaningful reform, and that the governor is 100% opposed to some of those Republican bills that are out there that would hurt working people. By rolling things into a 401k plan, no one is convinced that that is the right way to go. And I do believe that that is going to wither on the vine closer to the budget negotiations, which are, you know, the budget is due by the end of June. I sincerely doubt, Rick, that this governor is going to get a budget on time, not with a Republican-controlled legislature that's going to be out to embarrass him in his first year. So liquor privatization is going to be the first thing on the table. The second thing will be public pensions. They're going to drag this thing out. They will come to some sort of stalemate. And if they do pass a bill, which I don't see, then you still have the governor vetoing it unless it makes sense for the workers, because you can't penalize people who have worked this long and this much and have put into the system and not being able to give them a decent pension when they retire. It's just that's just wrong.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and I agree with your sentiments on the budget. I just don't see them coming together on something by the end of June. And what the Republicans will come forth with will be, I think, more of the insanity that we've had over the last 4 years.
That's exactly right, Rick. Because there is absolutely no vision over there, no leadership, and no courage to do the right thing. It's really frustrating. It's more of the same.
Insane stuff. Abe, I appreciate you taking time for us, sharing a little bit of your expertise. Thanks so much.
You got it, pal. Thanks.
Our good friend Abe Amoros, legislative director here in Pennsylvania for LiUNA. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Time to talk.
We want the world and we want it now. We're going to take it anyhow. We want the airwaves.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
Stay alive.
This week, the House will continue to focus on the people's priorities.
11th time's the charm. Republicans pass Keystone Pipeline bill again.
The magnitude of this deal is very, very big.
Apple invests big in solar.
It feels like we're under assault by Mother Nature.
Record snow in Boston, with more on the way.
State records reveal some disturbing news about California's drinking water.
Oil companies dumping toxic waste into California's aquifers. Plus,
estimates are that the monarch butterfly population has decreased 90% since the 1990s.
Uncle Sam wants you to help save the monarch butterfly.
All of those desperate pleas and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Even the president's own State Department will say that it creates 42,000 new jobs.
No, Mr. Speaker, the State Department doesn't say that.
But instead of listening to people, the president's standing with a bunch of left fringe extremists and anarchists.
Anarchists?
The president needs to listen to the American people and say, yes, let's build the Keystone Pipeline.
Actually, it's only a minority of Americans that want to build the Keystone XL pipeline, but whatever. You know how those anarchists are. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, just to clear up a fact here, the State Department did not find that the Keystone XL pipeline would create 42,000 new jobs. But to be fair, it did find that it would create 34 new jobs. So Speaker John Boehner is only off by about 41,900 and something.
Yeah, he's fudging the numbers on
Just a little, you think?
Yeah.
But then again, you're an extreme leftist or an anarchist. So what do you know?
Well, I do know that the House of Representatives passed the Senate's Keystone XL pipeline bill on Wednesday to force approval of the controversial pipeline from Canada. 29 Democrats in the House voted yes. One Republican, Justin Amash of Michigan, voted no.
Why did he vote no?
He said he's against special legislation for one private company to bypass the regulatory process.
Good for Congressman Amash. A little bit of intellectual honesty there. Appreciated.
Doesn't matter because President Obama has still promised to veto, and they still don't have enough votes to override that. Meanwhile, renewable energy is booming in the good, not explosive kind of way. Apple Computer CEO Tim Cook announced this week that Apple is investing $850 million to build a massive new solar farm. It's part of the company's goal to be 100% powered by renewable sources. All of Apple's data centers are already powered by renewables. Historic snowfall across the Boston area from a freight train of extreme storms with another on the way is straining the city's infrastructure and blowing a hole in its budget.
I've never seen anything like it. They're calling it Stormageddon, and it feels like we're under assault by Mother Nature.
Boston has received twice its average snowfall in just the past 3 weeks alone, and removing all that polluted snow is costing the city money. Some can be dumped in the ocean, but officials are now preparing for flooding when it melts. Boston's just the latest American city to discover it is not ready to deal with these extreme weather events. And in fact, a Department of Homeland Security official testified at a Senate hearing this week that total economic losses from extreme weather events over the last 30 years have cost the U.S. $1.5 trillion with a T, dollars. Too bad Boston can't ship that snow to California or Alaska. In Alaska, lack of snow has forced the Iditarod sled dog race to move its route for only the second time in over 40 years. And across the West, record warm winter temperatures are waking up grizzly bears early from their winter hibernation, according to rangers in Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. And in California, where the state is heading into its fourth year of historic drought, an AP investigation has found not only did California state regulators allow oil companies to inject production fluids and wastewater into federally protected aquifers, they allowed it more than 2,500 times.
They're injecting wastewater right beside an area where a farmer is pumping up irrigation water.
State officials say there's no evidence that water wells have been contaminated, but they have acknowledged the mistake and have begun shutting down some of those wells. Finally, monarch butterfly populations in North America have dropped 90% due to the exponential increase in the use of herbicides by farmers over the last 20 years. That's killed off milkweed, the monarch's food source. But good news, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service wants your help.
We can make habitat for the monarch butterfly in backyards, in schoolyards, in city, county, state, and national parks. And the magic is that if we make the habitat, monarch butterflies will come.
So I'm just supposed to plant milkweed in my backyard?
Yeah, that is actually U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Director Dan Ash. It's a new $3 million habitat restoration program. They want everybody to plant milkweed from Texas to Minnesota.
Okay, do I get any of those $3 million?
No, you don't get $3 million for doing it.
Well, then I'll think about it. For much more on that story and the ones we couldn't get to this week, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. While you're there, please consider a donation to help the Green News Report stay on your public airwaves and plant some milkweed. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Butterflies are free, and so are we.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. According to the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Monday they released a statement saying for the people who weren't unable to apply for Obamacare because there was like a weekend computer glitch, you're gonna have an opportunity. They have extended the deadline, the special enrollment period all the way till next week, February 22nd is the last day. So if you were diligently trying. And if you really were, they'll give you the time to go and do this extension. Because evidently, the IRS, one of the IRS functions boogered up. And about 500,000 people, they said, were trying to enroll. And they think, these people were held up by the income verification part of healthcare.gov because of this glitch in the IRS system. And so they're going to give them a shot. Now they say that the people who are still eligible for the special enrollment people, they are people who don't already have coverage through the federal exchange, haven't been terminated from coverage purchased through the healthcare.gov this year. People who say they have tried to enroll by the deadline and ran into technical issues, or they endured a long call center wait on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. So hey, I tried to call, I couldn't get through, and I gave up. That all you got to say is, hey, I tried, and they'll believe you, and I believe you as well. So there you go. Interesting stuff. And to me, the part that I love in all this is there are thousands and hundreds of thousands of people signing up for this, and in fact, it has exceeded what the White House had originally thought, pretty substantially. But it's still a failure, according to the Republicans. It just blows my mind. Now, look, am I thrilled with Obamacare? No. I would have loved to have seen a public option at the minimum. For those people who believe in competition, I don't see the competition between private entities. They're really not. There's for me, it's collusion. But that is what it is. And at the end, I would have loved to have seen a public option at the least. For those people who demand public competition. Joni Ernst, you remember the bread bag lady? I got bread bags on my feet. Her. Remember her? Yeah. Evidently, someone came up and found a recording of her on the campaign trail. Around the time, just after the election, is when this came up. And, it's one of those things where you go, we knew all this stuff, but she just, in a very succinct way, lays out her crazy points. And what's interesting to me is there's some things that I agree to shades with. She says, we need to do a better job of educating people. Let me just read what she said. She said, what we need to do is a better job of educating not only Iowans, but the American people that they can be self-sufficient. They don't have to rely on the government to be the do-all, end-all for everything that they need and desire. And that's what we have fostered. I don't see it that way. I see that we help people in need. And maybe there are a handful of people and some people who are abusing the system, but you don't scrap the whole system because you got a couple of knuckleheads. Anyway, she goes on to say that what we've fostered is really a generation of people that rely on the government to provide absolutely everything for them. She says, I'm going to take it's going to take a lot of education to get people out of that. It's going to be very painful, she says, and we know that. So, do we have the intestinal fortitude? And by painful, what does she mean? Are we going back to the welfare reform of 96 where they just said, here, everybody, you're thrown off, and we push people out into the workforce where where the jobs aren't there for them? Or do we have, look, I've never been a handout person. And this is where, I kind of get we've handed people too much. I kind of get that a little bit because I've never thought that they were good to begin with. I think jobs programs are much better. I think government as employer of last resort, much better than here's a funny looking coupon to take to the store and be humiliated with, or an EBT card that everyone knows and that banks rip you off on. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Frustrates me. But for someone like her who, well, let me just go through some more. In talking about Obamacare, she said, we're looking at Obamacare right now. Once we start with those benefits in January, how are we going to get people off of those? She says it's exponentially harder to remove people once they've already been on those programs. We rely on government for absolutely everything. And I got to go back to what do you mean by absolutely everything? I think the vast majority of people, I think they try to do what they can. But if you mean by giving a helping hand to help people feed their kids or put a roof over their head or heat their home so they don't freeze, I don't know that that's doing everything for someone. And I struggle with this. She goes on to say that in the years since she was a small girl until growing up into her adult with her children and on her own, we've lost a reliance not only on our own families, but on, here it comes, wait for it, what our churches and private organizations used to do. And I go, hold on a second. Just give me 1 second. Aren't you the woman whose family took almost $500,000 from the federal government in handouts and welfare? And aren't you a senator from a state where about a third of the state receives some kind of government assistance? So I'm kind of confused, Senator Breadbag, how exactly it is who we're talking about. And I get this weird feeling that this is very pointed and not at people like her who understand she's one of these people she's talking about. They got $460,000 from the federal government. For what? Well, it's because they owned a little land. The Farm Bill to me is a lot of corporate welfare, a lot of welfare to people like her. And I just find it very interesting that someone who, thanks to corporate welfare, she was able to move ahead and to succeed. And now she turns around and says, all you lazy people. That's frustrating. Because understand, when Mitt Romney said the 47% of you people don't pay federal tax, most of those people work. And it's the crummy jobs that we have left because of our insane trade policies, because of the tax policies that allow jobs to be shipped overseas. I mean, I agree with Chris Christie. We do have a ridiculous tax code. And he was in New Hampshire recently, because he's talking about running for president and doing that coy thing that politicians love to do. If I were to run, he would have, nothing new to offer. Understand what his three platforms would be is tax cuts for the very wealthy, tax cuts for businesses, the same attack the IRS, lower the rates for the rich and the corporations and raise them on everybody else, or do nothing and allow us to accumulate massive debts and all of that. He also, the drill baby drill, we would be, drilling and we'd be sucking energy out of every piece of the ground we could get, and a bully type foreign policy. Those are his three things. And which I guess isn't surprising that, in his home state of New Jersey, Hillary Clinton whips his behind. Rutgers University, the Eagleton Institute of Politics, just did a poll and found that Hillary would spank Christie about 58-35, or that's the numbers that Rutgers came out, 58-35. Also, she would spank Jeb Bush 58-32, and she would really spank Scott Walker 60-29. And I find it interesting that because you've got Christie, who's gotten himself into a bunch of nonsense when he was over in London, and then the vaccine thing. It's just one of those things that makes you go, are we insane? And the sad thing is the Republican Party really, I mean, there are some things that I really, in theory, agree with. This idea of personal responsibility, I think, is a good theme. But I don't think it's one that the Republicans really believe. Because think about this for a minute. Joni Ernst is up here talking, we need to get people to be responsible for themselves. Yet, when we say you have to be responsible for yourself, they're against it. I mean, really, that's the key argument against Obamacare. They're not going to tell me I have to protect myself and have insurance. If I get sick, I should be allowed to go to the hospital and free ride like most of my friends do. And I just, it just kind of makes me scratch my head because I am a pay your bills, fiscally conservative type person. I believe in being responsible for yourself. I believe in being responsible for your family and taking care of your friends and your neighbors and those things fully. I don't see that coming out of my Republican friends, although they talk a good game, don't they? I mean, the Joni Ernsts of the world talk a great game. We're going to go to Washington and make the pig squeal. Yeah, And exactly how you doing that? Oh, by taking health care from people. Oh, those pigs. I thought you meant the politicians and the special interests and the corporate elites. I thought those were the pigs you were going to make squeal. I didn't realize the pigs you were going to make squeal were the poor people who were already being squeezed. Oh, stupid, silly me. And then she's talking about inflicting this painful ideology because, it's going to be painful. It's going to be tough. As we take health care away from people who can't go into the market and buy it themselves. Because understand, and this is what's frustrating to me, because I listen to knotheads tell me this stuff all the time. Well, I shouldn't have to buy anything. I go, do you think you should have to pay for somebody else? Well, no. Do you think we should let someone die on the streets? Well, no. I go, then how do you get to that system where you don't let people die on the streets and people pay for themselves without saying everyone has to buy insurance? You have to have it. We do it with car insurance, right? Well, yeah, but yeah. And you don't seem all upset about that, right? Well, yeah. Then why are you upset about this? Yeah, the black guy. Yeah, I get it. I get it now. Thank you. Appreciate that. It makes better sense now. And what's frustrating is the rational Republicans have just lost their mind, and they're not there anymore. I mean, I just saw something with George Pataki, who I was never a huge fan of, but is now not looking so crazy. He was on Squawk Box, I think it was this morning, and he was talking about you're going to run for president, you're going to do all these things, and you're going to jump into the crowded field, and he said something that really just grabbed me. He goes, I think it's absurd in the 21st century that we're talking about things like measles vaccines and evolution instead of things like going after ISIS before they can attack us here and reforming Washington, where it's so controlled by the special interests. And I go, yeah, where are the rest of the idiots? And of course, he's throwing a shot at Chris Christie and Rand Paul over the vaccine thing, and throwing a shot at Scott Walker over a quote unquote punting over the big evolution question. But the reality is we've got so many problems. Our infrastructure is literally crumbling around us. Oh, Rick, you're making it horrible. No, we've got thousands of bridges that the American Society of Civil Engineers claims years past its expiration date. It's amazing to me that we don't have more collapses, that we don't have, or maybe we're just not hearing about it. But I drive and look, I still drive a truck on the weekends, and I'm still on the road a lot. Our roads are horrible. We have got lots of work to do. And as we continue to fight over evolution and vaccines, what we're not doing? We're not fixing our infrastructure. We're just not. It's insane to me. Just nuts. Democratic Congressman Sherry Bustos, Democrat from Illinois. She's introduced a piece of legislation. And this is one of those things where you go, I thought that's how it was. And I think most of us do. She's introduced a piece of legislation that would require the federal government. And I can't believe that this isn't already the law. And again, it comes back to and I doubt this will pass, but hey, who knows? She wants to require the federal government to purchase only American-made flags. Currently, I don't know who came up with this idea. Currently, if you buy if the federal government purchases a flag, an American flag, it only has to be 50% made in the U.S. And I don't quite know how the hell you make a flag halfway. So somehow we're still making flags in China. Maybe the fabric's here and they sew it all together in China. I don't know, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen flags with the Made in China label on them. And it's frustrating and it's angering. But that's not what the federal government's buying. And the thought was, if we're using tax dollars to go buy flags, maybe to give to soldiers families who have been killed in war, that maybe you'd think that those would be made here. According to her, she says that she's heard of stories. And again, I don't know if it's true or not. But people have told her that, veterans groups and veterans have said that the federal government is buying flags manufactured in foreign countries, and she's come forward to right this wrong. And I cannot believe, really, honestly and truthfully, I cannot believe that it's not already that way. But even this, of which I firmly believe is nonsensical and should have already been done, is, in my view, almost a waste of time, because now we're going to debate over this. These are things that my grandparents' generation, and the more I sit down and I think about my grandfather and I think about that generation, the more they didn't take nonsense from these politicians and this. And maybe it was because they didn't have a 24-hour news cycle. And maybe it was because, they didn't have C-SPAN. And maybe it was because, there wasn't this constant barrage of information going on. I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, this kind of nonsense up and down the chart would have never flown. And I guess, what does it say about us that we allow this? These are our elected officials. We voted for the likes of Chris Christie. We voted for the likes of Scott Walker. We voted for the rights of the likes of a lot of these idiots. Hopefully we unvote for that. It's insane to me. But again, I can't imagine buying an American flag made in China. That just blows my mind. Anyway, if you've missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And of course, as always, if you missed any portion, if you want to email me, you can email me, Rick@thericksmithshow.com. And again, the website there. I'm going to take a quick break right back after this. Going to talk about what's going on in Illinois and in West Virginia as the governor of Illinois is going after workers' rights. Same thing in West Virginia. It's kind of it seems to me to be a nationwide scheme, as we've been talking about. Anyway, quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
The first kicker took us when I hit the ground. End up like a dog that's been beat too much till you spend half your life just to cover it up now. Born in the USA, I was born in the USA, I was born in the
The Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better.
USA now.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Aerospace workers in Washington state want the state legislature to tie $8.7 billion in tax incentives for Boeing to job protection and wage standards. SPIA IFPTE Local 2001's Bill Dugovich says if taxpayers are forking over billions to Boeing, they deserve job and wage guarantees in exchange for such huge corporate tax subsidies. Polling shows 2/3 of the state electorate agrees.
When Washington did this, it did not tie it to jobs or wage standards. And what happened next was the Boeing company, within weeks, started moving work away from Washington to other locations. And in some cases, it moved work to locations to secure another tax break from a different state. It is not right for the taxpayers of Washington state to see their tax dollars be used as an incentive to move work away.
Larry Brown, legislative and political director of IAM District Lodge 751, says giving away billions in tax incentives with no job retention or wage standards makes no sense for Washington state taxpayers.
We are at a competitive disadvantage to the states such as Missouri and South Carolina, which specifically state the number of jobs that are required in order to receive the tax incentive.
Dugovich says wage standards are needed not only for Boeing employees, but for other workers in the aerospace supply chain in Washington state.
In the supply chain, there are people who are making $10, $11, $12 an hour. And this at times has been after taking state assistant training programs so that they could have a career in aerospace. They pass the programs, they get a job in aerospace, and lo and behold, they're not making a living wage to support themselves or a family.
The Teamsters struck the Canadian Pacific Railroad Sunday over safety issues. The union says it's on strike to overcome the culture of fear initiated by CP management. Teamsters Canada Rail Conference President Douglas Finson says the labor talks have revealed just how severe the employer's concessionary demands really are. Picket lines are up across Canada. The Teamsters say they want to introduce effective and progressive fatigue countermeasures within their workplace without diminishing the collective agreement. Unifor, a union representing maintenance and safety workers, reached a last-minute agreement with Canadian Pacific. That agreement came just minutes before Unifor was also to go on strike.
Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, health care, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Volkswagen just invested in Tennessee in a right-to-work state at a low cost with less health care. Why should we prop others up when other companies can compete in this marketplace? It's time to let these people learn the lesson the hard way.
Suddenly I see, this is what I want to be. Suddenly I see, why the hell?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. And, you know, when you hear this whole push for this no rights at work agenda, be it the assault on prevailing wage, be it the assault on dues collection, be it the assault on workers' rights to collective bargaining, it's all about who gets what. And it's about how much money gets into the hands of the shareholders and the corporate heads. and that money that didn't get into the pockets of the workers. And as Zach Wamp, the congressman there from Tennessee, said, hey, if they can compete with lower wages and less health care, that's the world that they want to take us towards. And I look at what's going on in Illinois right now, ground zero of the assault on workers, which is why I'm asking John Nichols. He's a writer over at The Nation. He's written a piece about what's going on over there with Governor Billionaire and why maybe this could be an opportunity for workers to fight back. John, thanks for taking time for us.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, my friend.
So I look at Governor Billionaire has done what a lot of my friends were expecting. I just don't know that they expected him to come out with an executive order saying, my decree, screw you people.
Well, it's an interesting twist because, of course, all of our Republican friends in Washington are so opposed to executive orders that actually give people more rights and protections. But they seem to be in favor of one that takes away rights and protections. And so it becomes a sort of a litmus test. And the real challenge now is for people to step up and take a serious look at what's going on in Illinois and ask yourselves whether Bruce Rauner, or as you refer to him, Governor Billionaire, whether Bruce Rauner is seriously interested in doing anything for workers in that state, or whether his real goal is to so severely weaken and undermine unions that even though his policies are already in his short tenure proving to be very unpopular, the opposition will not have the resources or the strength to stand up to him. And I happen to think that's what's really going on here. This is about politics, not about economics, not about balancing budgets.
Right.
This is a very wealthy man who bought himself a governorship. And now he is trying to govern not by doing what's right for Illinois, not by looking at fair taxation, at smart budgeting, not by working with the unions that are very, very willing to work with him if they on real serious responses to challenges that Illinois faces, but rather by trying to so weaken his opposition that there will not be a way to push back against what seems to be his agenda, which is to take a strong union state, a state that has a lot of people still going in and getting a decent paycheck, decent benefits, decent pensions, and rip that apart. And this is a big deal, not just for Illinois. I think this has been an undercovered story.
No,
Illinois
I agree.
is one of the
This
great
is
union states in America,
right.
and it deserves attention.
No, this absolutely does, because all the governors there in the Midwest. I mean, what's going to stop the governor of Ohio from an executive order? And I know they tried, they tried to pass a law. You had that whole push, SB 5 and all that fight that went on back in Ohio in 2011. But what's to stop other governors across the country from doing that as well?
Well, and this is a great challenge. There seems to be a new front in this struggle every few months. Some sort of new strategy. And Rauner appears, and I know our friend Scott Walker is going to be upset by this because he likes to claim the title, but Rauner appears to be jockeying for position as the frontline anti-labor governor in the country. And of course, he's working in a state with very, very strong unions, very, very strong union tradition. I mean, think about where did the 8-hour day movement have some of its first great struggles? Where did we see exactly? Where did you see some of the first great organizing? Where did Mother Jones organize? I mean, Illinois has been a real central spot for a very, very long time for labor. And it's obviously the kind of place where I think that a lot of these Republican governors, see as boy, if we could take them down, what's to stop us?
Yeah, that would be the end of it. And how much of this do you think is, it's as you said, it's not about politics. It's not about economics. It's not about what's good it's not about leading. It's not about governing. It's pure Machiavellian politics. It's taking our enemy in public and goring them and letting people know that they're doing this.
And doing it aggressively, saying, look, we're going to stop collecting dues. And, we're going to stop basically following standard practice for decades, better part of this century, and alter it in a way that's designed purely to weaken those who might be strong enough to say no to us now and again, to force the very, very wealthy, the very, very politically powerful to respect the need for public education, to respect the need for public services. Imagine, just imagine, if President Obama or if some Democratic governor was doing this to corporations. If you were literally undermining the basic infrastructure of corporations, can you imagine what the outcry would be in media across this country, and frankly from Democratic and Republican politicians?
Right.
It'd be overwhelming.
That
and
would
yet,
be.
that's exactly what's happening here. This is not saying, hey, workers, why don't you decertify your unions? Why don't you get rid of your unions? It's not saying that. It's not saying, hey, I want to have a real debate about this. It's saying I'm going to use the power of the state to make it dramatically more difficult for you to represent your members and to represent the people, sometimes who may not even want to be a member, but you still represent them. You're going to use the power of the state to undermine that. If a governor gets away with that, and that's what Rauner really wants to do, he wants to take this up to the Supreme Court and get Supreme Court approval of this sort of action. If he can get away with this, then the labor movement in America will be really kicked in the teeth in a way that, for all the kicks that have come along, this will be dramatically worse. It won't kill the labor movement, because no free country is ever without a labor movement, and it will, in some ways, force people to reconstitute in other vehicles, other approaches. The labor movement will continue, but the problem is, at this moment of dramatic income inequality and dramatic economic challenges, if you undermine the labor movement so dramatically in states like Illinois, in states that have traditional union strength, then you genuinely weaken the ability of the American people to say no to corporations, to say no to corporate-funded politicians, to begin to address the challenges of our moment. And that's the real problem.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this.
How long do we delay responding to issues like income inequality?
And that's the thing. And this is one of the things that I've been asking for a while. And, does it have to be that the labor movement has to have these kind of, as you put it, kicks in the teeth with this going to the Supreme Court? And there's another Supreme Court case that, who knows which way they go on the Abood decision on undoing that. And there's part of me that goes, maybe we need this, though, John. Maybe to wake people up and to go back and refight those fights again, because we're sure not learning from reading history and looking at the past. I got to wonder what it takes.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I've heard this before. Going back, I've covered labor for a long, long time, going back to the 80s even. And I remember Henry Nicholas, the great organizer with 1199.
They're in Philly.
The workers' union. And Henry Nicholas argued back in the 80s, maybe we should just get rid of the NLRB, that maybe, or at least some of our labor laws, because they'd become such a burden to labor, that actually things that were supposed to make it easy to organize had become a real burden. And I understand where people say, look, maybe we ought to just go back to what was before. But that argument is separate from the one I would make at this point, because whether the existing structures and the existing approaches work or not, whether they become so burdensome to organizing that people do look at alternative models, the great challenge is this. Right now, we have a labor movement in this country. It's taken a lot of hits. It's spending, tragically, too much time defending itself against those hits, rather than being on the march. And that's certainly a goal of those who attack labor. But I would step away and ask this question. Do we need a strong labor movement now? Not 10 years from now, not 20 years from now, but right now.
Absolutely.
The answer is yes. And when you look at really staggering income inequality, when you look at fundamental challenges to basically building a fair and equitable society, that the labor movement, that we need the labor movement in this moment, and that you need it to be strong. And while I think that there's a lot that that you could argue for changing, and a lot of new approaches and alternatives. One of the things we have to recognize is why these very, very wealthy and very, very powerful people are focusing so much of their energy on attacking the labor movement. It is because they know their ideas and their approaches are not popular. They know that they cannot prevail in a fight where they still would have the most money, where they'd still have a dominant position. But if there's any voice out there, if there's any vehicle out there by which the opposition to kind of runaway corporate power, runaway billionaire power, is there any way that opposition can coalesce and build up and get strong and get in the streets and do things and also get to the poll, then that's a problem for them. So I think the first stage right now is to say that it's vital to prevent these assaults on labor from happening.
I absolutely agree with you. I would have been much happier if the governor billionaire Rauner there didn't get into office. But there's part of me that goes, we've been so brainwashed in this country, and there's so much messaging going in that unions are bad, public sector's bad, government's bad, and private corporations and billionaires are good. That at some point maybe things just have to get so bad that people are shaken awake by the fact that inequality is even worse than it is now, and which is now as bad as it was before the Great Depression, or even worse, actually.
No, your point is, and I don't think we're on different sides of this discussion. I think your point is, when do we get the wake up call? I mean, how do we recognize that this is a big deal? Now, here's an interesting thing that's happening in Illinois. The governor, a Republican, but a guy who kind of forced himself on the Republican Party, he almost lost his primary.
Yeah, he bought his way in.
Yeah, and then he bought his way in a Republican wave year to the governorship. Now, this is the one thing everybody knows. If Illinois' gubernatorial race had paralleled the presidential race, if you'd had presidential level turnout, Rauner would not have won.
Right.
As simple as that. And so 2016 in Illinois, you're going to see elections. One of the elections is for the job of state comptroller. Now, you don't think much about the job of state comptroller in Illinois. That's not a big thing on your list of concerns. Except, here's the deal. They have a Republican state comptroller, a woman who was recently appointed by Rauner. And her job is to basically manage the state's funds, release the checks, make the payments. She has said that she will not implement Rauner's order.
Oh, wow.
Why? Why is she saying that?
Well, she wants to be reelected, I would think.
Yes, and she's up in November of 2016. She's looking at the reality of what voters want, at the reality of what a high turnout election, not a low turnout midterm election, but a high turnout election will produce, and it's going to be a pro-labor vote.
So let me ask you this, John, because
that's where the Illinois thing could potentially give us a twist on some of these fights.
But don't you think, given that dynamic that you've laid out with this one comptroller, isn't that something that you would expect for a lot of the Republican politicians who, maybe and I don't know how gerrymandered Illinois is. I know here in Pennsylvania, it's horribly gerrymandered. But wouldn't you think there would be some Republicans in the state house saying, well, I better watch myself as well? Because as I understand, this executive order in the state, in the General Assembly there, can be overturned, or am I wrong?
Well, they can certainly push back. There's no doubt of that. But it becomes a challenge of passing legislation in their Assembly and Senate to counter some of these actions. And, the truth of the matter is that in watching this Illinois thing, I've been fascinated by the many layers of legal struggle here, right? So the governor puts down his order saying, we're not going to collect the fair share dues anymore from folks who are represented by the union, but don't necessarily join it. So that order comes down, and then everybody's like, oh my gosh, well, the governor's done this. This is amazing, blah, blah, blah. A couple days later, state attorney general says, you can't do that. The fair share dues are constitutional. You can't order that they not be collected. And then everybody's like, whoa, now there's a conflict. And then the comptroller, this Republican, steps up and says, well, I'm going to do what the attorney general says because I don't want to violate the law. I want to respect the law. And so that's next layer. And then Rauner comes back and says, well, I don't care what you folks are going to do. I'm going to order the state agencies not to do this. And all of this is going to create a huge legal fight. That's going to be the end play out here. I actually think there's a decent chance that you're going to find a judge who's going to order that these contracts be respected, that the dues be collected, that the fair share be collected, and that's going to keep it in a relatively stable place for a while.
Yeah, but what does our activist Supreme Court do?
That's the scary part. That's what this. My gut is that that's what this is all about. That at the end of the day, this is not about immediate issues. This is about something in the next year or so, the next couple of years. And here's the important thing to recognize. You have in Samuel Alito on the U.S. Supreme Court a justice who has essentially said in his consents and in his different rulings and statements he's written.
Especially in the Knox decision.
Knox is the key, of course. But he essentially said he wants to go after this. He literally wants to go after the basic infrastructure of maintaining a union. It would be if you were to look at another alternative, be the equivalent of saying, I want to take apart the whole structure by which we do stockholders for corporations. Right? We're gonna alter all that, and at the end of the day, undermine the ability of corporations to function. Right? Well, that's what Alito has essentially said as regards unions. It is his desire to go after them in this incredibly aggressive, very focused way. He hasn't had a case that has perfectly fit that, but my sense is that Rauner and the lawyers working with him are trying to give him.
Yeah.
And that's why we have to watch this thing. Again, I know people have real struggles in their own communities, in their own states, and you just struggles to get by sometimes. I know you have listeners who are, certainly have plenty of problems on their plate already. But this Illinois fight, my suspicion is going to be the one that we track back to and see as really a kind of vital turning point. And it's why people across the country have to be very, very interested in it. It's why labor, I think, has to stand strong. But it's also why we have to recognize the absolute importance of talking not just to Democrats, but to Republicans as well. Finding those Republicans like this state comptroller and like some members of the Illinois legislature, Republicans, who may say no to this guy. Because, here's an interesting thing. He's talking about using the state's resources to fight this case up to the Supreme Court and to lay out a battle against labor. It would be very, very interesting if people of the state of Illinois, through their votes and through their actions, signaled, no, we don't want to be on the front line of attacking organized labor. We'd rather be on the front line of making things work for labor.
Yeah. And funding education and roads and infrastructure and all that other stuff that money could have been spent better on. But, and last line of questioning I've got for you, John, because, I look at this and, this is just another step in my view of taking us back to the bad old days of the Lochner era, where there were no labor laws, there were no maximum hour laws, no minimum wage, no health and safety, none of that stuff. And that's where I see that the Rauners of the world and the corporatists who have taken control of the Republican Party want to take us back to where if John Nichols is desperate enough to work for basically free in horrible conditions and long hours, then by God, he should be allowed to do it, and we should be allowed to exploit his labor. That's where I see them wanting to take us back to. And labor and you and me, none of us having a say or a voice in those conditions.
Well, I think that the motivations can vary for these folks. And some of them really are just foolish. They genuinely believe in some sort of trickle-down fantasy that if you make the rich super rich, somehow money's going to come through society. And they actually may think that's going to work. The evidence against it is so strong that it's sort of amazing that anyone still, bumbles along in that fantasy. But others, I think, really do look for a situation where working people are so at the behest, so in need of whatever tiny bit of job or payment or wages they might get, that they'll basically let corporations do whatever they want. And where this becomes perhaps even a greater madness than trickle down is that it's the antithesis of what Henry Ford understood 100 years ago.
No.
by any means. But he recognized that if you don't pay American workers a fair wage, you're not going to be able to sell things here. Now, this takes us to the final, you say your final line of questioning. This is the final component of this, troublesome scenario. So many of these people who really are advocates of taking apart unions, even going after and attacking the minimum wage, and so many of them are hardwired into, deeply invested in globalization, that they really are interested in making their money wherever money can be made. And unlike, say, a Henry Ford, who still believed American workers needed to be paid well so that he could make money selling them cars, we now have a billionaire class that appears to have very, very little interest in the condition of American workers, and a huge interest in advancing trade deals like TPP and European variation on that. And we end in a situation where that's maybe the most important thing that working class folks and that voters need to recognize. That we have a lot of political players, a lot of people involved in our politics now, who don't seem to be particularly interested, one way or the other, in the condition of American workers, who seem to be deeply engaged with creating a race to the bottom that they, as investors, as very, very wealthy people, can win, not with fellow Americans, but rather in a globalized circumstance where if they don't make money in one place, they'll make it someplace else. That's where these things all come together, I think.
Right, and that's why I'm hoping that by talking to folks like you and talking about these issues, someone picks their head up and goes, "Hey, we're going down the wrong path. We need to turn around and go back the other way."
Yeah, and you know what? The truth of the matter is, when we start to talk about this in a deeper way, we bring in the globalization element, the other factors, I think we begin to reach a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans, who aren't up at the top of that economic food chain. They aren't on the winning side of the income inequality gap. And they start to ask themselves, boy, maybe, when everybody keeps telling us we've got to blame the unions or blame immigrants or blame somebody else, maybe that's not where the problem is. Maybe the problem is in the very, very wealthy and very, very powerful people who control so much of our economy and so much of our politics and don't seem to be at all interested in us, whether we're liberals or conservatives, Democrats or Republicans.
Exactly. Exactly. If you want to take a look at John's piece, we've got a link to his latest article on Governor Billionaire there at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on John's name. It'll take you there. John's a writer for The Nation magazine. Does great work over there. John, I appreciate you taking time for us. Always great to have you on the program.
You're waging the good fight. And
we're trying.
And it's awful important in the area of communications. We've got to keep people thinking about these issues.
Thanks so much. John Nichols, Nation magazine. Again, check out the article, thericksmithshow.com. Just click on his name, take you right there. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
It's desperate times, so desperate measures we explore. Marching on the Capitol to lobby leaders for involvement. 3,000 people screaming out, "Where's our government?" Lawsuits and arraignments, members under company surveillance. Public divided, either they love us or they hate us. Profit billions off our back, and it's still not enough. They should have took into account that we never give up. We'll be here one day longer. One day longer. The people's voice is stronger. We work hard for our money. We work hard for respect. Keep fighting for these rights for generations. It's next. One day longer. One day longer. The people's
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thoughts are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. A current question is which workers are entitled to union representation? Who really gets counted as a worker? And who decides wages, hours, and conditions? These were the questions that divided the campus of Yale University. On this day in labor history, the year was 1992. The Graduate Employee Student Organization on campus began a 3-day strike. They were supported by Locals 34 and 35, part of the Hotel and Restaurant Employees International Union, who represented the clerical workers, dining service staff, and technical and maintenance workers at Yale University, as well as the dietary workers at Yale New Haven Hospital. These workers stood in solidarity with the graduate employees and walked out in a show of support. They recognized the important work the graduate employees did for the university, including teaching classes and grading papers. Yet, Yale administrators argued the graduate employees' primary role was that of the student, and they were therefore not entitled to union representation. The year before, the graduate students had held a one-day strike, but did not gain union recognition. As a result of the 1992 strike, some graduate students received improved funding. They also received inclusion on the Yale Executive Committee, an administrative body. Yet, they were again denied the right to be in a union. Another strike 3 years later had the same result. Today, there are 31 recognized graduate student unions in the United States. There are 18 that remain unrecognized. One of these is at Yale University. Today, universities more and more seek to cut costs by having graduate students and adjuncts teach courses. These workers are paid far less than tenured professors, and they are increasingly turning to the idea of unionization. The question remains, will they be recognized as real workers, and will they have a say in their wages, hours, and conditions? Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We're talking about the story of the long trail taken by Jack Daniel and his family through politics, bureaucracies, and plenty more. Jack Daniel was orphaned as a teenager, but was taken in by a lay preacher in his hometown of Lynchburg, Tennessee. The preacher man was Dan Call. And not only did Dan preach, he also ran a small moonshine distillery. The first of several key events in the famous success of Jack Daniel's whiskey was that Preacher Dan and his former slave, named Nearest Green, taught Jack how to distill. The next was that after years of litigation between the 15 Daniel children over their father's estate, Jack got a pretty healthy inheritance. Jack took the lead in acquiring a permit from the state, such that after a painstaking process, he and the preacher established a legally registered distillery. Join us again as Jack takes over. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
If I were looking for a good job that lets me build some security for my family, I'd join a union. If I were busting my butt in the service industry and wanted an honest day's pay for an honest day's work, I'd join a union.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So we go from Illinois with Governor Billionaire there with the executive order going after workers and going after the no rights at work agenda. Now we're going to head over to West Virginia, where yesterday more than 1,000 working people hit the Capitol there in Charleston, saying, "Hey, this attack on prevailing wage, this attack on the history of our state." Has got to stop. But understand, the wheels are turning. All the bad ideas that were birthed in Wisconsin and moved its way across the country, well, I guess are right there at their Capitol doorstep. And here to talk a little bit about yesterday's rally and where they're going to go and what's going to go on, I've asked Kenny Perdue. He's the president of the West Virginia AFL CIO. Kenny, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Rick. I deeply appreciate it.
So, as it sounds, the bad idea cocktail train has made its way to Charleston, huh?
You know, you talk about a train, it is here. But a little bit west of here is where the train wreck happened, east of here, and then North Dakota Oil decided to dump into the Cadawba River and pollute the river again, as well as, I understand, maybe 18 trains caught on fire.
Yeah.
from crude oil. So we've got a train wreck here going on in Charleston and the area surrounding area for sure.
And I mean, Charleston was just the area not too long ago where you had Freedom Water, where the company spewed all that stuff into your water supply owned by a American Water. And again, what it seems to be now, West Virginia seems to be the almost ground zero of all the bad things and the bad ideas that the right wing has been pushing down our throat for years. Deregulation, lower tax rates, all of the bad ideas, attack workers. It seems like right now it's all coming to a head.
Well, it is hitting here. And it's happened to all the other states. I guess they've had the chance to refine their message, language, talking points. And, I know we're not going to be the last state, but it is here. We're having the fights of our life here for workers. But, the one thing that you talked about that rally yesterday, which Senator Kessler initiated, it was about everything across the board, that it was a miserable day. It snowed. We had about 10 inches of snow that happened during the day. And the workers stood outside for a rally. And we had a couple thousand workers that came in, most of them construction workers, most of them union workers. But they stood out there, they heard the message. And I'll just say this, Rick, they are fired up.
And look, they have to be. I mean, if you're going to push back against this money train that is really steaming down the tracks, it's going to take all of us. And I often say that the wealth class has more money, but we've outprocreated them. And the hope is that we hold these people not just accountable at the ballot box, but also in the streets with our friends and our neighbors, because it doesn't seem like there's any consequence to these bad ideas.
Well, the consequences are people are losing a livelihood. You take somebody in prevailing wage. That I'm a construction worker myself. I'm a sheet metal worker by trade, and I got into this as a career, not just as a part-time job, as a career.
Right.
And there's so many people got into it as a career that their livelihood is being challenged right now because of prevailing wage. Mine safety issues. They're trying to take back mine safety issues back 50 years. At a time when workers got killed, and everything that's on our books and others is about somebody getting killed. That's why the issues are addressed. In charter schools, our school systems, I think we've got a very good school system. We're just struggling some, and we're Appalachian. You could take it that way. We can try to improve, and they're always trying to improve. But these charter schools is going to take money out of existing school systems, and I think that's what the local boards of education and the county commissions and the cities need to understand. They're going to have less money to work with.
Yeah, I mean, what scares me in listening to this, I imagine, the Don Blankenships of the world and these coal companies taking over charter schools and, it being coal charter school. And that scares me.
I'm not going to repeat on some of the things that people said to who may take it over, but it is very much a possibility that a right-wing zealot who's soon to go to jail as Don Blankenship is, I hope, for what he did to UBB, that could conceivably put money into a school system, take over the charter school, and be running that school system himself.
Yeah.
And as the bill goes through, the determination is, are they going to be employees of the county? Are they going to be private employees? If they're private, they stand a chance of losing their health care and their pension. Seniority, all those things that's important to them on an everyday basis.
Let me ask you this, on the prevailing wage issue, because we've got the attacks here in Pennsylvania on the prevailing wage issue, and you've got these right-wing politicians. We're paying too much for construction workers and all this. In the studies that I've read, and in places that have done away with it, what it appears to me that happens is you end up losing the industry that you had, and you end up having, basically transient labor come through doing shoddy work. I'm curious if you've seen any studies or anything that would lead us to down the road of what would happen in the event that prevailing wage were to be eroded in some fashion or done away with.
Well, there's two most important things. One is the workers, and the other is the contractors that these workers work for. The contractors have said, if you abolish prevailing wage, that we will get out of business. And the truth is that when they don't have the work, these workers in turn, when they've started a career, they eventually are going to find something else they're going to find their income from. So they start losing their well-trained workers. They start losing the work. And the other thing is just exactly what you said. we have that competition. I would imagine in Pennsylvania, other states have it, but we're closer to the southeast. And there are a lot of developers that will, not maybe, they will come up here. They're watching. They'll come in here with their money. They got a pocket full of money. They'll come in and start investing money into any kind of construction they can get into. Then they'll come in and they'll get into the prevailing wage area of it. And they can, if they don't have to pay a prevailing wage, our contractors can't compete with them. So they're going to bring their own workers. Would venture to say that as maybe most or all will be transient workers, and they just want to make a living, but the contractors will be abusing those workers to a way that which they that's not what they got into it for.
Yeah, and then with transient labor, you end up with all of the societal problems that nobody wants to talk about, all of the crime, all of the STDs and the sexually transmitted diseases, the alcoholism, all of the stuff that comes with that, of people who come and go, and nothing good in my view. So, in my view, nothing good comes out of undoing these sane, rational regulations.
Well, it's a lot of people are happy with what happens on the construction, because construction sites are a good, safe workplace, drug-free.
Now, yes, now, and
they are now. But and soon, if they abolish that, and these contractors come in, the drug-free workforce stops, and then the drugs come even more with it. So, a safe construction site. If you talk about prevailing wage or right to work, these construction sites go up. There's numbers out there show it's 54% increase in unsafe workplaces and fatalities or injuries in these sites, because they don't have the programs to guide them through and make sure that they work safe.
Yeah, so let me ask you, what are the chances of this this bad idea cocktail of harming the prevailing wage, of pushing the no rights at work agenda, and also doing away with some mine safety regulations in the charter schools? What are the chances of this stuff actually becoming law?
Well, the prevailing wage law has already passed the Senate over to the House, and I understand there may start some committee meetings this week on that. So that is already moving. The objective is to try to save it from abolishment and try to keep as much damage done to it away from it. We expect that as one of their top priorities. So that's going to be very tough to keep it the way we want it, but it is to keep it as where it's presentable to the contractors, the workers, and the state. Mine safety laws, as it sits right now, that's on a grease track that is moving. And it's sad to say it's the same companies that worked so many years to make the mines safe are now going back and say, well, we don't want to be as safe as what we once were. Charter schools is going to pass in some way, shape, or form. It's just trying to relieve as much damage to it as we can and get it to the degree to where it doesn't take over the school systems that are so much struggling now for financing. And right to work, as we talk every day with leaders about right to work, I don't know if right to work, they've got the will to do right to work, but we are working every day to ensure that we inform legislators, House and the Senate, and the public on what we see and what we have known from the history of it, that right to work is bad for West Virginia.
No, it's not bad just for West Virginia. It's bad for Pennsylvania, Michigan, all of these states that pursue this stuff. It's bad for. And the states that are right to work right now, they're the ones who are honestly they're number one in all the bad things and number one from the bottom on all the good things. I don't think that's by accident.
It is not by accident. It is a creation of the powers to be that have a lot of money, and they just want to control workers. And I want the workers to listen to this. They want to control workers in a way that it goes back 100 years when you go into mines where they give script, they controlled your life, where they control your wages, when they control your livelihood and didn't have health insurance. And those things are so near and dear to your heart. It's worth people to pay attention to and to say they've had enough and they're going to fight back. And I will say this, that what the rally happened yesterday with the 2,000 plus workers that were there, they are very angry. And I'm saying that honestly, they are very angry at what this legislative group has decided they're going to do to their livelihood. and they're going to fight back.
And they should be. Last question I've got for you on the prevailing wage thing, because, we keep hearing here in Pennsylvania that if we just do this, and look, I don't think most people understand what prevailing wage is. When you talk to the average person on the street, they don't really get all the complexities. But they do hear this one message often that, if we just did away with this, we could save 30% on all building contracts and everything that we do. Isn't that a lot of money? Wouldn't you like to save 30%? And, people start going, oh, well, we're struggling. We can use that 30% for other things. Yet when you sit and you look down at that number, 30% is actually impossible. 30% would mean the workers were actually paying to work. There's just no way it could be done. Are you hearing the same kind of messages there in West Virginia?
It's verbatim. It's what you just said. It's about the last I heard is they can build 5 schools for the price of 3.
Wow.
And the reality is that you cannot do it, because even if you're talking about those kind of wages and you lower the wages, you're still only talking 25 to 30% is the wage cost. It depends on the job. It depends on the way you build the facility. Most of it is labor. Most of it is material.
Right.
And it being material, that's something you have to go with what the market says. That's what they want. They want what the market says. Well, you're going to save a little bit of money if you lower it dramatically, but in the end, if you get a bad workforce, a poor workforce, and a drug full workforce, in the end, you're going to drive your cost up a lot, because it has cost overruns or just will be there, looking you straight square in the eye.
Now, how about we just use eminent domain to steal the construction things we need and all the cement and the bricks and all the lumber and stuff? I wonder how they would like that kind of an idea. Not that I'm advocating for it, but how would they like that?
Thought of that. The powers to be have probably thought of that anyway, that they can steal the materials and get them for cheaper, and then take the lives of workers away so much. It's an unbelievable time. I know it's in this country, but as we look at it in West Virginia since the past election, first thing they want to do is to have the effect on workers' lives so much as they brag about the workforce, but they want them to be the first one to pay.
Yeah, it's all about tightening someone else's belt, not their own.
That's it.
Sad stuff. And the thing that bothers me is that they've never shown me where you actually save anything from passing prevailing wages. And in states that have done this and taken away the prevailing wage rule, it's actually cost more to do building projects. And in fact, here in Pennsylvania, when they did it at one time, the bids were actually considerably higher, and they had to go back and rebid the whole process again. To me, it's just a way of stealing from working people and screwing up our economy, which our Republican friends seem to be pretty good at.
To something exactly what you said. We've got some very good union contractors and even some non-union contractors that bid on these prevailing rate jobs. Up north, quite a few of them come out of Pennsylvania, but they're good contractors that they know how to get the job done, get it on time, and you get a quality product. Well, the bad players in this know now how to manipulate bids and how to get these bids a little bit under what that union contractor or a good contractor is going to do. And they'll come in and give you a very poor product in the end, but they are very smart, they're very conniving, and they will come in and take the lives away from a lot of people and the communities, the school systems, and everything that's affected. They'll have an effect on them. So
yep.
It's our objective is to fight, and we will be doing that, and there'll be other opportunities like yesterday's rally. Hopefully it won't be into a blinding snowstorm, but if it is, we'll be there.
Yeah, and let us know, because Charleston's not all that far. We'd love to come down and cover those things. We were down there for the mine workers when they were fighting against Peabody and Patriot Coal. We love a good fight, and I'd appreciate if you let us know what's going on.
Well, send me some information so I can get a hold of you, Rick. I appreciate the opportunity, and we'll. As labor is fighting all together between all the ones I talked about. There's no backing off any of it. Everybody's supporting each other.
At the end of the day, as the old Knights of Labor saying goes, an injury to one is an injury to all. Kenny Perdue, I appreciate you taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick, and you have a good day.
You too. Let's take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Man, it's slow. The tip jar's light and the register's low. The bartender don't have much to say. The regular crowd gets thinner each day.
Some are maxed out all their credit cards. Some are working 2 jobs and living in cars. Minimum wage won't pay for a roof, won't pay for a drink. If you gotta have proof, just try it yourself, Mr. CEO. See how far $5.15 an hour will go. Take a part-time job at one of your stores. I bet you can't make it here anymore.
Chicago, city of broad shoulders, plutocratic hog butcher, toolmaker for progressive change, stacker of the wheat of grassroots power, wheat separated from the chaff of corporate politicians, stormy, husky, brawling, planning, building, breaking, rebuilding. Under its wrist is the pulse, and under its ribs is the heart of the people. Laughing, proud to be hog butcher, toolmaker, stacker of wheat. Apologies to Carl Sandburg for my butchering of his 1914 poetic paean to the rise of this colossus of a working-class city. But I see a promising new movement of broad-shouldered populist change for all of America arising today from the heart of Chicago's workaday people. Under the banner of Reclaim Chicago, a dynamic, politically savvy progressive coalition has emerged, engaging thousands of grassroots Chicagoans in a people-led democratic movement to reclaim their city from the cabal of corporate elites and corrupt politicians now reigning over them. These are not just mad-as-hell ranters, but mad-as-hellers with a bold agenda for moving their city toward fairness and justice for all. They're mad-as-hellers who have a shared vision, a long-term plan, a democratic organizational framework, a range of trainers to provide movement skills and tools for all involved, a network for developing, electing, and holding accountable their own office holders, and, most important, both a strong sense of purpose and an energizing sense of fun. After all, battling the bastards is about as much fun as you can have with your clothes on. This is Jim Hightower saying, Reclaim Chicago is not merely an election apparatus, but a democracy movement, building a permanent progressive majority that functions year-round, year after year, so the people truly can become self-governing. Contact them at reclaimchicago.org.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Where family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show.
I got to be honest. It's sad to see. I mean, when we spent time going through West Virginia during the People's Tour for America back in 2013, we went to Blair Mountain, and we were met by a bunch of working people. And what's amazing to me, and I guess there has to be that education process of of the history, or a reminder of the history, because here you had these folks coming out with their sidearms. Because they thought we were there to attack the coal industry. When in essence, I was just we wanted to talk about history. Wanted to talk about the history of the battles between these coal barons and their government, and their purchased government against the workers. And, nothing really has changed other than the tactics. We're no longer shooting workers in the streets much. We're no longer calling out the National Guard to gun people down as we did back, 100 years ago. But when you're using government and the power of the law against working people, there's a problem. I have a serious problem with this. And this prevailing wage issue is something for me that makes perfect sense. You want to encourage a local industry. You want to encourage local craftsmen to be able to make a living. And if you're going to be using taxpayer dollars, it makes sense to me that you make sure you pay a reasonable wage. Now, stop and think about the rhetoric. And I haven't explained this in a while, and I haven't gone through it in a long while. And it came up in the conversation there with Kenny Perdue. A building project, and what we're told often is that on a building contract, that if you did away with prevailing wage, we could save 30%. on the whole cost. 30% of the cost of building something we could save. Understand the cost of labor in the majority of the prevailing wage type jobs is around 20 to 24% of the total cost of a job. So stop and think about that. Around 20 to 24%. I've seen some as low as 18, some as high as 25, 26, but for the most part, in that 20 to 24% range. In order for you to save 30% on that job, the workers would have to work for free, so you saved 20 to 24%. Where does the other 6 to 10% come from? Would the workers pay back? I mean, this is where the rhetoric really comes down. Now, I know where they got that number, because unions like to say that, union workers make about 30% more than non-union workers. And that's true in the construction industry. So if they're trying to lower, to screw those workers and say, well, instead of raising up the non-union workers so that they make a better living, it's about tearing people down. And really, the Republicans are the party of tearing down. They're the destroyer party. And what's frustrating to me is we buy it. I mean, I'm shocked that West Virginia is actually pursuing what Kenny Perdue was talking about, going after mine safety regulations. Really? After you've had a history, I mean, an industry history of disaster and death and mismanagement and unsafe working conditions. Really? And all of the fights and all of the strikes and all of the battles and all of the stuff that took place to make sure that the mines were safer, all of that history just wiped out. It's stunning to me. And yet we're still talking about one of the poorest states in the country. And really what the wealth class of this country has masterfully figured out is you've got these poor people in Appalachia. You've got these poor people there who, those construction workers make $12 or $13 or $15 an hour. Wow, I can't make minimum wage. They shouldn't get that. It's that kind of mentality, and it scares the hell out of me. Because we allow it to happen for far too long. Instead of saying, we should all be able to make a decent living. We should all be able to put food on the table. You've got the forces that are saying, no. You're still not going to make a decent living. You're still not going to be able to put food on the table, but you shouldn't allow those people to either. And for me, the other big part of prevailing wage is I prefer a local construction base. The people who build the school that my kid's going to sit in, I think I would feel a lot more comfortable if the guy who built it, his kid was in that same building. I would like it that, maybe his wife teaches in that school. Maybe his family goes to that, to that stadium or to wherever, to that store or whatever. Because maybe they're going to take a little extra care to make sure, hey, my kid could be in this place. Or building that bridge that, they may themselves have to drive over. That makes sense to me. This idea of having people coming through and with all of the problems that come through with it, just seems dumb. And this from the people, the family values people, or so they say. This from the local control people, or so they say. I mean, we've really gotten some screwed up priorities in this country. And it comes down to whose benefit. If we know that you're not going to save 30% on the projects, what's the end goal? Well, it's about gutting those unions. It's about going after those workers. Now, the last thing I'll leave you with on prevailing wage, and this is the really bizarre part of it. There is a way for non-union contractors to take it over. All they have to do is report the wages that they pay their employees, because it's the prevailing wage. It's not the minimum wage. It's not the median wage. It's the wage most often paid in that area for that job. So if you have electricians working for these non-union companies who are all making $8 an hour, technically you could have a prevailing wage of $8 an hour if that's the wage that's being most paid. But that would mean that these contractors would have to tell what they're paying and what they're charging and how much they're putting in their pockets. Because at the end of this, what it's really about is you've got these non-union contractors who don't want their employees to figure out how badly they're getting screwed. And getting screwed badly they are. Because understand, the contractors charging prevailing wage rates, but not paying prevailing wages. That's the key to all of this. And I hope that the sooner we wake up and the sooner that we go, hey, wait, we're getting the shaft here. Maybe the sooner folks get angry and do something about it. And I'm really sad to see what's happening in West Virginia. And fortunately for a governor that we elected here in Pennsylvania, all of that ugliness isn't here. Because without a Governor Wolf, if Corbett was reelected, all of that craziness, all of that insanity, all of that whole bad idea cocktail is front and center right here in Pennsylvania. And it's scary, scary stuff. Anyway, if you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. Rick Smith Show app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go. And also you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back with hour 3. Stick around.
Strike on a beautiful night. Yeah, it's my song I'm singing. Somebody better start counting. We're coming out swing.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Aerospace workers in Washington state want the state legislature to tie $8.7 billion in tax incentives for Boeing to job protection and wage standards. SPIA IFPTE Local 2001's Bill Dugovich says if taxpayers are forking over billions to Boeing, they deserve job and wage guarantees in exchange for such huge corporate tax subsidies. Polling shows 2/3 of the state electorate agrees.
When Washington did this, it did not tie it to jobs or wage standards. And what happened next was the Boeing company, within weeks, started moving work away from Washington to other locations. And in some cases, it moved work to locations to secure another tax break from a different state. It is not right for the taxpayers of Washington state to see their tax dollars be used as an incentive to move work away.
Larry Brown, legislative and political director of IAM District Lodge 751, says giving away billions in tax incentives with no job retention or wage standards makes no sense for Washington state taxpayers.
We are at a competitive disadvantage to the states such as Missouri and South Carolina, which specifically state the number of jobs that are required in order to receive the tax incentive.
Dugovich says wage standards are needed not only for Boeing employees, but for other workers in the aerospace supply chain in Washington state.
In the supply chain, there are people who are making $10, $11, $12 an hour. And this at times has been after taking state assistant training programs so that they could have a career in aerospace. They pass the programs, they get a job in aerospace, and lo and behold, they're not making a living wage to support themselves or a family.
The Teamsters struck the Canadian Pacific Railroad Sunday over safety issues. The union says it's on strike to overcome the culture of fear initiated by CP management. Teamsters Canada Rail Conference President Douglas Finson says the labor talks have revealed just how severe the employer's concessionary demands really are. Picket lines are up across Canada. The Teamsters say they want to introduce effective and progressive fatigue countermeasures within their workplace without diminishing the collective agreement. Unifor, a union representing maintenance and safety workers, reached a last-minute agreement with Canadian Pacific. That agreement came just minutes before Unifor was also to go on strike.
Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, healthcare, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
If the federal government continues to do the kinds of things that this administration is trying to do through the back door, through the National Labor Relations Board, that's killing our free market system.
We're running out of rich people in this country.
NLRB has become
a political sycophant for labor unions.
And one of the things the Congress should do immediately is defund the National Labor Relations Board.
It seems to me that what we're seeing is a ceding of power from Congress to the NLRB and other agencies.
Really is a freedom versus tyranny issue.
I'm a member of the GOP, trying to form a plutocracy. But if I can just bamboozle you, and you'll share my narrow point of view, what a wonderful world this would be.
Oh, yes. How wonderful it would be if, we didn't have to worry about safety regulations. And, it would be fabulous if we didn't have to pay that dreaded minimum wage. And, it would be terrific if we didn't have to pay overtime or worry about those child labor laws anymore. Wouldn't life be fabulous if you just didn't have any of those pesky regulations? Wouldn't that be great? Well, if you're a billionaire, it would be. But if you're the rest of us, if you're the folks who get up and punch a clock and work for a living, this is a horrible, horrible situation. And what we've seen going on across this country, as we talked about in the last hour, in Illinois, you've got a billionaire governor going after absolute power. You've got a legislature in West Virginia going after stealing wages from workers. And, all across this country, you're seeing this billionaire class, this ALEC type legislation being pushed through. And the sad reality is I'm not seeing the kind of anger and the fervor and the pushback that I would expect. And even against, the National Labor Relations Board, which most people don't even know what it does. This assault to destroy this one little advantage for working people. Sad stuff, which is why I've asked John Logan. He's a professor and the director of labor and employment studies at San Francisco State University. He's written a great piece over at The Hill. The right wing declares guerrilla war on the NLRB again. Here's John Logan. John, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. Glad to be on.
So here we go. This again. I mean, how dare they want to be able to join unions and have a decent wage and put food on their table for their kids? How dare they?
Right. It really is all over again, as you say. This really started almost as soon as Obama took power. After it was clear we weren't going to get the Employee Free Choice Act, we weren't going to get labor law reform, the Republicans and big business immediately switched their attention to the National Labor Relations Board and set out to make sure that they obstructed the board, that they stopped it from functioning, that they did everything possible to make sure that the board couldn't make even the sort of slightest little difference around the margins, because they figure at the moment that that big business really has a stranglehold over the system of union certification, and they're not prepared to give that up. So here we have relatively modest proposals by the board to speed up NLRB elections and really just to do away with the very worst cases of unnecessary and unjustified pre-election delay and litigation, where employers engage in these deliberate delaying tactics for the sole purpose of trying to undermine a union organizing drive. The NLRB came up with some modest changes to try and do away with the very worst cases. Wouldn't have made, they were very worthy proposals, but in the grand scheme of things, the truth is it wouldn't have made a heck of a lot of difference. Unfortunately, the system is still stacked so heavily in favor of the Walmarts, of the McDonald's, of the Amazons, of the corporations who are virulently anti-union, that rule changes like this by themselves wouldn't have made a lot of difference, but it was still too much for the right wing. It's still too much for the Chamber of Commerce, for the Orwellian named Coalition for a Democratic Workplace, and all of these far right groups, and indeed for the GOP senators and representatives who do their bidding, in Congress, and so they're perfectly open about it. I mean, as I say in the article, Randy Johnson, the vice president of the Chamber of Commerce, the country's most powerful lobbying organization, has said that the chamber will conduct guerrilla warfare, that's his words, against the National Labor Relations Board to prevent it from being able to implement these new election rules. And they're doing everything. They have the legal challenges, they have the oversight hearings, in the House and in the Senate. We've seen in the last couple of weeks, we'll see a Congressional Review Act to try and stop it. We'll see legislation coming from the GOP. We'll see efforts to try and defund the National Labor Relations Board. All of this stuff, just because they cannot tolerate any fairness whatsoever in the system by which workers get to choose a union.
Yeah, I mean, what's the fear of people coming together? I don't know, 30 years of tearing them apart, all of their mission accomplished moments. And I look at this, and I got to be honest, the frustration I have with this is I don't think labor has done a good enough job of explaining their side of, in their case. I don't think the and maybe it's the media culture, maybe it's maybe the cards are so heavily stacked, but I just don't see my union friends, fighting back against this as much as I would like.
Well, that's true. I mean, it's in some ways it's always a bit of a mystery. I mean, the right wing, really knows where their class interest lies, and they know their goal is to completely decimate the labor movement and to make sure there's no chance of any revival. They want to destroy both public and private sector unionism. We see the assault on public sector unions in Illinois, in Michigan and Wisconsin and in Ohio, etc. And at the federal level, we see these efforts to make sure that there's very little chance that private sector unions can organize workers in any meaningful way. And the labor movement has lacked a sort of language to explain to people why these rights are fundamentally important. I mean, people understand, of course, how terrible the world of work is becoming in this country. People understand, how awful, the income and wealth inequality is in the country, that they have no rights at work, that they have no protection at work, that they're completely at the mercy of, any arbitrary and dictatorial treatment that they get from their bosses. They understand all of those things, but, the labor movement, I think, and people who support the labor movement, need to do a much better job of explaining the connection between the declinions and and how work has become so miserable for so many people, and in fact how the revival of the labor movement really is the best hope to creating a more decent and fair workplace in this country, perhaps the only hope of creating a decent workplace.
What's interesting to me, John, is that all of the fervor and all of the anger that the right wing puts up whenever the NLRB came. I go back and I remember the NLRB decision that said that employers have to put up like a little poster that says, what your rights are. They just have to. You have to put it in the bathroom or somewhere up with all of the other stuff. Just a little notice saying, hey, you have the right to join a union. They went ballistic.
Right.
And it was the end of the world, and it was tyranny, and all of this stuff. And it was like, it was the end of the world. Yet we see the assaults on working people every day. And I just don't see that kind of response from workers, that I wish at some point that we would be as we would own our rights as much as they want to take them away.
Absolutely. And that example that you cite in many ways is the perfect example. I mean, you could not get a more sort of clear-cut illustration of the fact that they're so determined that people will not even get to know what their rights are at the workplace, that, they were so determined to strike down this rule that they would be required to post on the wall. And the way they reacted to it, you would think they were being asked to post, pages from the Communist Manifesto. In reality, they were being asked to post the law of the land. They were being asked to post workers' rights under the National Labor Relations Act. But, this was just, say completely beyond the pale for them. It was intolerable that young workers, immigrant workers, that all sorts of other workers would get to hear their rights and get to learn about their rights, that, that this was just not going to stand. And, the labor movement, and again, people who support the labor movement need to do a better job of explaining what's going on here, because the symbolism there just sort of seemed so perfect, that they would be prepared to engage in all-out war to stop people hearing about their rights under the law. And with these elections too, as you say, some of the changes are just to modernize, to bring the board's processes into the 21st century. Other changes are to an attempt to do away with things that no one can justify. That employers should not be able to engage in this deliberate process of delay, and yet. Even these modest proposals, if you listen to the Republicans talk about them, if you listen to the Chamber of Commerce talk about them, they use this apocalyptic language, some of which you played before we started talking about how this was going to be the end of free enterprise and all the rest of it. And on the other side, we haven't had that much, we haven't really had that many powerful voices, coming forward to explain why not only are these justified, but they don't go nearly far enough to restoring any semblance of democracy at the workplace. Yeah. And that this is the one thing that might actually restore workers' bargaining power, and allow us to escape from decades of stagnating and falling wages and all of the other forms of immiseration that people were suffering at the workplace.
So what do we do? I mean, how do we fight back against this? Most people, like I said, don't know what the NLRB does, because we've really been separated from our unions, and the education process hasn't been there. But how do we save this? How do we fight back against what we know is coming? And it's it's the same. It's the MO of the right wing. It's to defund. It's to starve government. It's to make it small enough that you can drag it in the bathtub and drown it. If you want to look at the Grover pledge there.
Yeah, sure.
What do we do?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is difficult, and I think one of the things that that we've learned over the past few years is that everyone knows that the way the law operates at the moment. So all of the cards are in the favor of corporate America, of big business. If employers have the resources and the stomach for the fight, then they will win in most cases. But we also know that so-called organizing outside of the law is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly resource intensive. It often takes a very long time, and can probably only be done as part of a mass movement. And, and this is the reason why things like the, walking off the job by the fast food workers and the airport workers and the home care workers and the Walmart workers are so potentially so important developments. We do need to protect the law, and we do need to protect the board, because, if we allow Republicans to destroy the law that protects workers' right to choose a union and to bargain collectively, even if we actually get to the point of having an upsurge in support for unionism and for justice at the workplace, it's going to be so much more difficult if that law is not still in place. Right. So it's easy to say that, the NLRB has become essentially irrelevant. I understand, my friends, a lot of friends in the labor movement, a lot of friends on the, liberal left, think that, the board's not worth saving anymore. But the reality is, there has to be some process. There has to be a law that still protects that right to choose a union and to bargain collectively, so that, if and when we get to the process of, having a significant mass of people who are really at the point where they're not going to take any more, and they want to assert their rights at the workplace, there's still a law to defend them. It's tempting just to say, forget the law. The law is against us, but I don't think we can forget it entirely.
You gotta keep it.
Yeah, I think we got to defend it. I mean, we got to continually push back and say, these are modest proposals. They don't go nearly far enough. We need to go much further. And, we need to constantly explain why the deliberate project on the part of the right to destroy organized labor has put us in the dire economic position that so many workers are in today, and it's only through reviving unions that we're going to say get respect and justice and escape the stagnating wages and rebuild the workers' bargaining power. We need Democrats in Congress. They're not the only ones, but we need Democrats in Congress who are prepared to say that just as loudly as the Republicans are on the other side. Because what we've seen over the past few weeks, it's not just the usual suspect, Klein and Lamar Alexander and the chairs of the Republican committees. It's Mitch McConnell, it's John Boehner. It's like every senior Republican in Congress has come out to bash the NLRB, and we need an equal effort on the part of the Democrats to defend workers' rights.
So the question that I have for you, John, is, is this the moneyed interest giving the marching orders to the top of the Republican ticket to say, look, we see all of this organizing going on. We see, as you pointed out, the fast food workers, the Walmart workers. We're seeing all of these people lifting their heads, finally going, hey, we're tired of this. And you know what? And is this preemption then? Is this them saying, well, we better cut this off while we still can?
Yeah. No, I'm sure it is. And, I keep on hoping against hope that, maybe they've overplayed their hand and that, maybe they would have been just better at keeping silent about a system that is, doesn't work for workers even the way that it is. But as we've seen, in numerous states around the country, I think that that in addition to reacting against the evidence of organizing going on amongst low wage service workers, I think they also smell blood, and I think they sense an opportunity to to finish off unions once and for good, once and for all.
Yeah.
And we talked, but the various cases are going to go to the Supreme Court. The laws are being passed at the state level, that have had a dreadful impact in places like Michigan and Wisconsin and others. And what's going on at the federal level, and we kind of assume for the past 20, 30, 40 years that basically nothing goes on at the federal level when it comes to labor policy. But actually, we've seen a great deal of activity on the part of the Republicans. They don't care, incidentally, that, that the bills that they introduce or that some of these motions to block the NLRB election rule, they don't care that these things are not going to pass. Their strategy is, well, we'll do it. And if it doesn't pass, maybe it will pass after the next election or the election after that, or the one after that. They unlike the Democrats, they seem to be in this for the long term, and they seem to be, yes, they know exactly where their interests lie and what their goals are, and they don't just try it for one election cycle and then give up. they try it, and, for election cycle after election cycle. And as you say, so much of this legislation is centrally coordinated, through American Legislative Exchange Council, and it's funded by the Koch brothers and their organizations. And, and we see similar legislation at the federal level now, in the form of the Employee Rights Act, another Orwellian named piece of legislation whose only purpose is to diminish unions and to diminish workers' rights. And they won't get it passed in this Congress, but that doesn't matter to them. They'll keep going.
That's because they know whose pocket they've got their hand in, and how much money they're taking out of it. And that's why we need to educate ourselves, activate, engage, and fight back. Again, the piece, Right Wing Declares Guerrilla War on the NLRB, again, written by John Logan. John, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much, man.
I'm very happy to be on, Rick. Thank you.
All right, let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
We're in a fight to bring the middle class back, and we ain't even planning on losing in this mighty war. The working class is under attack. Get up, fight on. Stand up, fight on. Yes, we can fight on. To the death, fight on. Get up, fight on. Stand up, fight on. Yes, we can fight on.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. A current question is which workers are entitled to union representation, who really gets counted as a worker, and who decides wages, hours, and conditions. These were the questions that divided the campus of Yale University. On this day in labor history, the year was 1992. The Graduate Employee Student Organization on campus began a 3-day strike. They were supported by Locals 34 and 35, part of the Hotel and Restaurant Employees International Union, who represented the clerical workers, dining service staff, and technical and maintenance workers at Yale University, as well as the dietary workers at Yale New Haven Hospital. These workers stood in solidarity with the graduate employees and walked out in a show of support. They recognized the important work the graduate employees did for the university, including teaching classes and grading papers. Yet, Yale administrators argued the graduate employees' primary role was that of the student, and they were therefore not entitled to union representation. The year before, the graduate students had held a 1-day strike, but did not gain union recognition. As a result of the 1992 strike, some graduate students received improved funding. They also received inclusion on the Yale Executive Committee, an administrative body. Yet, they were again denied the right to be in a union. Another strike 3 years later had the same result. Today, there are 31 recognized graduate student unions in the United States. There are 18 that remain unrecognized. One of these is at Yale University. Today, universities more and more seek to cut costs by having graduate students and adjuncts teach courses. These workers are paid far less than tenured professors, and they are increasingly turning to the idea of unionization. The question remains, will they be recognized as real workers, and will they have a say in their wages, hours, and conditions? Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happy! Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. That's the happy dance, the billionaire happy dance. Because the Rouners of the world and the Walkers and all of these right-wing politicians, they got to be thrilled because they're really, as John Logan has pointed out, there really hasn't been the kind of pushback that I had hoped for and actually anticipated, especially over the Rauner decision, over the executive order. I know they think they're going to fight it through the courts, but for me, the idea is it's not about just running it through the courts. These are organizing opportunities. These are opportunities that when you're under attack, that you wake people up and go, hey. And as I said earlier, I wish, really honestly and truthfully, I wish we would take ownership of our rights and hold them as dear and fight for them as much as those who want to take them away are fighting for them. And I've often said that, at some point, you've got to make people think about that union card that's in their wallet the same way the NRA has trained their folks to think about the Second Amendment. The right to join a union, the right to collective bargaining, the right to a say and a voice on the job. You should be holding those things as close as my gun friends hold the NRA and the Second Amendment close to their chest. That's the kind of, and it goes back to my grandparents' generation. My grandparents, my grandfather was a staunch union supporter, as were a good many, even the people who weren't in unions back then, because as a society, they kind of understood that if that guy over there sweeping the floor, how many times have you heard someone say, we shouldn't be paying someone $15 an hour to sweep the floor? I don't make $15 an hour. How many times have you heard that nonsense? Instead of going, that guy should make $15 an hour. And of course, I do more work than he does. And I'm a little bit better educated, a little bit better skilled. I should make a little bit more. But we don't think that way anymore. It's weird to me. And, I guess it comes back down to this. We've been trained like Pavlovian dogs to begin to salivate when someone gets something that we don't and, wanting to take it from them instead of saying, hey, how do we make sure we all do better? Yet, even with the Pavlovian dog, example, and maybe it's we don't understand. Maybe it's we don't see it. That's part of it. That could be part of it. Maybe we don't see the opulence the 1% lives in. Maybe we don't see the amount of wealth that's gathered in the hands of the top 1%. And you look in 2014, the very wealthy people in this world, the top 1% worldwide, they held 48% of the global wealth. 1% of the people on this planet held 48% of the global wealth. Oxfam, they just did a new analysis, and they predict that by the end of next year, that 1% will then have more wealth than the rest of us, the bottom 99% of us, everybody else. Stop and think about that for a second. Now, when you stop and think about, bring it home to this country, the top 1% of 1%, those people making about $8.5 million a year, they pull in about 4.5% of the income in the country. About 4.5%, this top 1% of the 1%. Yet you go back to 1978, that 1% of the 1%, they took about 5 times less, about 0.86% of the wealth in this country. And you know who got the rest of it? Workers did. And that's the thing that gets me. That's the thing that makes me just want to bash my head against the goal and go, what's going on? Why can't we get it? It's mind-blowing. And, maybe it's coming. Maybe with the organizing that's going on around the fast food workers and the Walmart workers and what we're seeing on the West Coast and the port truck drivers and, maybe all of this stuff, we're starting to see some bubbling up. Maybe. I can be hopeful, can't I? But at the end of it, it's going to take us being passionate. It's going to take us being angry. And it's going to take us waking up and getting away from the silly nonsense issues. I guess I'm the eternal optimist. And I'm sure that sound you heard was my wife hitting the floor. Is what it is. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
They saw that food was everything to man. And maybe then they had a thought, help before it's full. got more money to their hand. And the boys keep getting bored, turn away, not equal to admit the way they plan. It's taking all the soul away from everything they grew. They can't handle it, on which to stand.
Uncovering the con and conservatism. Rick Smith.
On July 5th, 1935, the National Labor Relations Act was signed into law. It is also known as the Wagner Act after its chief sponsor, New York Senator Robert Wagner. Prior to its passage, Senator Wagner chaired the National Labor Board, created by Franklin Roosevelt in 1933 to attempt to bring order to labor management relations. The National Labor Board consisted of 3 representatives from labor and 3 from industry, with Wagner as the chairman. It was here that Senator Wagner realized government assistance was required to level the playing field if labor unions were to effectively bargain with management. President Roosevelt said of the National Labor Relations Act, "It should serve as an important step toward the achievement of just and peaceful labor relations in industry." Hailed as the Magna Carta of labor, once the National Labor Relations Act was signed into law, workers were encouraged and protected to exercise their newly recognized rights to freedom of association, self-organization, and engage in concerted activities for the purpose of collectively bargaining through a representative of their own choosing in order to establish wages, hours, and conditions. Employer interference, such as threats and intimidation, firing, refusing to negotiate with the union, and discrimination for union activity were expressly prohibited. These illegal activities are described as unfair labor practices by the law. The impact of the Wagner Act on American life was substantial. The standard of living for American workers, their families, and communities was extraordinary. Unionization rates increased to a high of 35% of the American workforce as American workers demanded their rights. Working men and women finally had a unified voice to stand up and fight for dignity, respect, and safety in their workplace. This Rick Smith Show Labor History Moment was made possible by a grant from the Labor Education Center at IUP. For more information, visit www.thericksmithshow.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We're talking about the story of the long trail taken by Jack Daniel and his family through politics, bureaucracies, and plenty more. Jack Daniel was orphaned as a teenager, but was taken in by a lay preacher in his hometown of Lynchburg, Tennessee. The preacher man was Dan Call. And not only did Dan preach, he also ran a small moonshine distillery. The first of several key events in the famous success of Jack Daniel's whiskey was that Preacher Dan and his former slave, named Nearest Green, taught Jack how to distill. The next was that after years of litigation between the 15 Daniel children over their father's estate, Jack got a pretty healthy inheritance. Jack took the lead in acquiring a permit from the state, such that after a painstaking process, he and the preacher established a legally registered distillery. Join us again as Jack takes over. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
In the end, Wall Street, with Obama, Duncan, Bloomberg, Walcott, and Goldstein as its agent, they want to turn public education into private, profitable businesses. They hope to impose a factory regime of managerial control over educators' working conditions and our students, our children's learning conditions.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So in Oklahoma, you've got a Republican legislator and a bunch of them, and they're debating whether or not the advanced placement courses that are taught in public high schools should be continued and taught in public high schools. According to one bill currently being considered, they would specifically ban AP U.S. history courses. No U.S. history advanced placement courses in the high schools there in Oklahoma. And I guess it all comes over. They're angry. They're angry. Not enough George Washington being taught and too much about slavery. And I guess this is, that argument over, over which American history we teach. Is it the revisionist right-wing history? Is it the American exceptionalism, which they're both angry? They're all angry that isn't taught in the U.S. history books. I don't know what it is, but here again, what you've got is people saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be paying for that. Let them take out student loans like those other kids. Sad stuff. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world and in Washington, D.C. Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you. How are you, Rick?
I am good. A little frustrated, a little angry as I see the attacks on workers in places like Illinois and West Virginia, and the assaults on the NLRB, and all the stuff we've been talking about today on the big program.
The West Virginia thing kind of amazes me. I was talking about it on another station today because I was born in Wheeling, West Virginia, and the congressional seat, as you know, borders West Virginia there. And the state has just went so fast to the red category, but it still was a state, just like Belmont County, Ohio, which is Democrat majority voters, but it was a state where you had a heavy influence of prevailing wage, workers' rights, etc. So West Virginia is not one of those states where it's, highbrow, all business. And I'm shocked that even though the legislature went Republican, I'm shocked that they're even venturing into things like right to work.
Yeah, it's insane to me. But what it shows is just about how much power that the moneyed interests in this country have, and these big corporations, when they're talking about undoing mine safety regulations in West Virginia, after all of the tragedies they've had, not just in the last several years, but in the last 100 years, it just blows my mind.
Right, and we've had balances. Ohio, the word right to work is forbidden, and Ohio. Is a state which has larger amounts of corporations, but it just seems that the stranglehold on West Virginia, for them to go in the direction they're going, I'm not talking about the people voting in the Republicans, but the Republicans to take the directions they are on, again, bringing up right to work is really kind of unheard of, and even in states like Ohio.
No. Well, I mean, this is the push that the corporatists want to take us in. It is what it is. Let's move along. In D.C., I was reading this morning, Boehner's already, they're certainly willing to let the funding for Homeland Security, going to lapse in 2 weeks? He said, quote, the House has done its job. We've spoken. If the Senate doesn't like it, they'll have to produce something that fits their institution. And it seemed like he was ready to let the Department of Homeland Security close up because, as I understand it, you can help me if I'm wrong, it would just mean all of those essential workers would be working for free.
Right. And, a lot of services would be basically curtailed. February 27th would be the stopping of the money flow. Boehner, originally, as a Republican speaker, said that the Democratic side was they were holding things up in the Senate. Now, he knows very well that the Senate's controlled by the Republicans. And yes, there's the ancient cloture rule, which I think is terrible, where you need 60 votes instead of simple majority. But the fact remains, as Boehner pretends, this whole deal about, the Democratic side is the party of no, and they're holding this up. He knows very well that John McCain and Senator Mark Kirk, who is no, moderate, he's a right winger, have both said, no, we're not doing this. We're going to have a clean bill. Now, they're mouthpieces for Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader. The Senate is going to strip the House bill of any of the anti-Obama immigration language, and it's going to send back a clean bill. Then, Rick, let's see how brave Boehner is about shutting down Homeland Security.
Yeah.
Now, with this recent court ruling by this judge in Texas, it's a temporary thing, but some of the Republicans may have cover in the House to say, we're going to vote for Homeland Security because maybe this federal judge is going to stop immigration. Who knows? I still argue Boehner does not have the guts. He might have the idiocy, Rick, but he doesn't have the guts to shut down Homeland Security. He picked the wrong agency anyway.
Yeah, I'm right there with you because what were to happen if there was something of an attack while things are closed, quote unquote closed down, even though we know that they're not closing anything really down. People are still going to have to show up to work because they're essential. It just means they wouldn't be getting paid at the moment, so they'd be showing up working for free. But heaven forbid, what if something were to happen during that time? That would be, I think, the end of the Republican Party.
Well, I think so. And the thing to pay attention to, I think, for the Democratic side is pure and simple. You already have this is February, within 45 days, you have the Republican Senate telling the Republican House no on an initiative that the House originated to screw the President of the United States on his immigration policy. You already have the Republican Senate disagreeing with them on a major, major provision that the House Republicans have put forth, okay? So really, this division is not going to stop. You're going to see problems between Boehner and McConnell is going to play the leader of the Senate, Boehner, like a fiddle. So I think that if the Democratic side can really put a mantra together appealing to, the lack of disparity of income and a lot of other issues and defend what they've done, I think they'll probably make some strides over this already infighting that's occurring.
Yeah, and that couldn't be a bad thing. But I look at what's going on in Washington, and I saw this interview with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Supreme Court Justice, on MSNBC on Monday, and she said the current Congress is not equipped to really do anything, and I listen to that and I go, I'm kind of afraid, because we're told they're the ones who are keeping us safe.
Well, they have trouble with taking Homeland Security in this situation. What's going on now? Wrong agency. The authorization. Let's see. Do they tinker with this authorization against ISIS to the point where they render all of it useless? Do they do so much infighting that they can't agree on even minor things? And so they're in control now, the Republicans. Yep. And once you get in control, and you got to. I have to look back and give Newt Gingrich some credit to the fact that he had a mantra, the contract with America. He put it forth. He protected. He allowed us, I should say. He allowed us to protect labor's rights with prevailing wage. We would not let the Bush administration remove prevailing wage. We wouldn't do it. We stood firm for Davis-Bacon. Gingrich again could have put the hammer down. He let there be a free vote. So you have a whole different personality these days in Boehner. And if people thought Gingrich was not a good leader, just look at John Boehner. And he makes Newt look pretty sharp.
Yeah, well, I thought Newt was not I thought he was an effective leader. I didn't like the direction he went,
right.
But I thought he was an effective leader in getting what he wanted done. Granted, like I said, I'm not thrilled with what he did, but it is what it is. So what do you think of this judge's decision to block the president's plan to protect these undocumented immigrants from deportation?
Well, the judge was a little bit smarter, maybe, I think, than some people are giving him credit in the sense of this. Look, he doesn't like the president. He's made enough statements under the sun that he should actually have recused himself, most likely, from this case. He doesn't. He says the president, the White House did some smuggling of children. They're in conspiracies. But he ruled not on the president not having the constitutional authority to do what the president did with immigration. He ruled on the procedures, the president following certain procedures. Now, that's interesting. He's picking apart technical procedures.
Right.
So let's see what the appeals court does, and if this has to be followed all the way up to the food chain of the Supreme Court. But then again, they shopped. Look, they went to Texas, so they shopped for a judge that they thought they'd get a sympathetic ruling to people that oppose immigration.
Yeah, they
now
got
this isn't going to change. This isn't going to change anything. Nobody's going to get deported because there are people in the pipeline. You have to wait for the court to act. And besides, regular immigration cases, there's about 350,000 that are stalled right now just because of lack of funding of immigration judges.
Yeah, because we can't get any judges appointed.
Right, exactly.
But again, this is mission accomplished for the right wing, who doesn't believe government can work, and if you gum up the gears enough, then nothing can happen. This is mission accomplished.
And I'll tell you something that will be amazing to watch the Republican side. If the Supreme Court does rule on the exchanges in June, and if the ruling is not favorable to the White House, you will have instant chaos of people in the system.
Yep.
They owe taxes. What are they going to do about a subsidy? Are they insured that day? If the Republicans would respond to that, you would literally have about 8 million or more people in limbo.
Yeah, a little bit more than that.
maybe even more by that time. So it's going to be a very challenging year.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. Let's move along. I understand there's a big conference on extremism. Tell me about it.
Yes, it kicked off today with Vice President Joe Biden. Now, the talking heads are going to go crazy. Well, they are going crazy on the White House because the White House is having this, on extremism. Why didn't they, in fact, say something specific about, Muslims? Why just extremism? And we don't know the details of it yet. The president will speak tomorrow, but it kind of dovetails with 60-some countries that have been invited to the State Department to talk about worldwide problems and extremism. So I think what the White House is trying to do, Rick, is to not just say this isn't just a Muslim issue or jihadist issue. You have a lot of things that have gone down in this country. You had somebody, the other day that killed 3 Muslim students who was against religion, period. So you have a lot of just the man who went in and shot up the Holocaust Museum, the man who went into the Sikh temple in Wisconsin. But those are religious examples, but there's other extremism, militia that have done things in the country. So I think they're trying to take a broad picture to it, things that are going on around the world.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that as well. Let's move along and look at extremism. ISIS evidently burned 45 people alive. Really?
Yeah, this one's. The video is so horrific on the 25 that beheaded, and now they have burned alive 45 some people within 5 miles of the American base that we're using. I mean, they just don't stop, and it's just causing more furor. So, maybe this will make some type of unification of that region, of the Arab countries in that region, for them to take ISIS on, meaning Jordan and Egypt, and the Iranians are involved.
Well, they're the ones who I think should be doing it. It shouldn't be us.
In that backyard, they're in that backyard of theirs, so they have to do something about it. And I think they realize they're dealing with lunatics, and if they don't do something, it's going to come back and get them.
And I go back to that great decision of taking out Hussein. Again, I'm not a huge Hussein fan. I don't think he was a great guy, but it was still a horrible, horrible decision.
You had Christian churches functioning. You didn't have Jewish people killed. I mean, it just Saddam, as bad as he may have been from some of the things he did, he kept an order that doesn't exist today.
It's just nuts. Anyway, Bob, I appreciate you taking time for us, filling us in a little bit on the news going on there in the big city. Thanks so much.
Have a great evening. Thanks.
Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
From Cambridge, Massachusetts, this is your World in 2. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service. Climate negotiators are departing Geneva today after completing an 86-page negotiating text, a draft of what could be signed in December. Throughout the document, there are language options, side-by-side paragraphs that give a sense of where the document could veer in the months ahead.
One of the key questions is, what's fair? What is it fair for the United States to do versus Europe versus China?
Jennifer Morgan is the global director of the World Resource Institute's climate program. Some countries, like the U.S., have advocated doing away with distinctions between developed and developing nations, arguing that developing nations like India or China will soon be among the world's largest emitters, and they shouldn't be governed by a different set of rules. On the other end of the spectrum, certain developing countries say they still need to grow, and that past emissions from the developed world are what led us to this unsustainable juncture. But Morgan says there's growing support for striking a balance instead of taking sides.
I think there's a group of countries that are all trying to do their fair share to solve the climate change problem. And that means that the richer countries of the world do a bit more because they are able to. But countries that are just trying to feed their kids need a bit of support to make that happen.
So what about a big overarching goal for the treaty? Reaching zero net carbon emissions is emerging as that target. It's ambitious, but the negotiating text contains 2 potential end dates. One, the year 2100, the other merely the latter half of the century, and Morgan says the difference matters.
If you go all the way out to 2100, what the science, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says is, you have a much lower probability of avoiding these climate impacts that just get more and more extreme.
For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Chicago, city of broad shoulders, plutocratic hog butcher, toolmaker for progressive change, stacker of the wheat of grassroots power, wheat separated from the chaff of corporate politicians, stormy, husky, brawling, planning, building, breaking, rebuilding. Under its wrist is the pulse, and under its ribs is the heart of the people. Laughing, proud to be hog butcher, toolmaker, stacker of wheat. Apologies to Carl Sandburg for my butchering of his 1914 poetic paean to the rise of this colossus of a working-class city. But I see a promising new movement of broad-shouldered populist change for all of America, arising today from the heart of Chicago's workaday people. Under the banner of Reclaim Chicago, a dynamic, politically savvy progressive coalition has emerged, engaging thousands of grassroots Chicagoans in a people-led democratic movement to reclaim their city from the cabal of corporate elites and corrupt politicians now reigning over them. These are not just mad-as-hell ranters, but mad-as-hellers with a bold agenda for moving their city toward fairness and justice for all. They're mad-as-hellers who have a shared vision, a long-term plan, a democratic organizational framework, a range of trainers to provide movement skills and tools for all involved, a network for developing, electing, and holding accountable their own office holders, and, most important, both a strong sense of purpose and an energizing sense of fun. After all, battling the bastards is about as much fun as you can have with your clothes on. This is Jim Hightower saying, Reclaim Chicago is not merely an election apparatus, but a democracy movement, building a permanent progressive majority that functions year-round, year after year, so the people truly can become self-governing. Contact them at reclaimchicago.org.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
I strongly support the idea of the state saving money, but not by risking the safety and the security of my constituents. That's why I sponsored this bill. We can't hand off really important public safety protections to the lowest bidder. I mean, that's just crazy.
Well, we're going to hear it, and we're going to hear a lot of it. Oh, if we just privatize, we'll make more money. Yeah, I got a tweet from the Commonwealth Foundation, which you always love the Tea Party think tank chiming in. We'd make more money if we privatized. Yeah, and they're pink fluffy unicorns too. Show me where that's happened in the past. I can show you Washington, who's regretting privatizing their liquor stores. Not very happy about it. In fact, all of this talk, we bring in more money if we just private. How many times have we heard this stuff? How many times it's going to be better for everybody? It's a win-win. When we give up our assets, we give up our things. It's a win-win. It's kind of like the people who go, you sell your house to somebody, rent it back from them. It's a win-win. For who? Nuts. I mean, have we lost our minds? Really? So yeah, pink fluffy unicorns for everyone. Because look, I understand. The tax revenue is still going to come in. And you may actually see a bump in revenue because of increased sales. The problem with that is very, very short-sighted. We'd have more money coming in. Yes, but your costs go up. Your costs go up exponentially. One, the first thing you lose is you lose 1% of the entire business right from the start, just because you've got that preferred tax for people who pay their tax on time. That little incentive. You lose that immediately. Now, that's the reality. So you got to make that up, increase sales. Then you lose control of who's selling it, which means you're going to have underage drinking problems. You're going to have people who are driving and drinking and all of the things that come along with that. Societally, it's a bad idea. I'm in favor of modernizing. That makes sense to me. Loosen up the restrictions a little bit and make it a little. I think it's perfectly fine the way it is, to be honest. I know where the liquor store is. When I want something, I go get it. Pretty simple. For adults, not very difficult. Problem is we're dealing with petulant children. I want now. Yeah, amazing. Anyway, great show today. I appreciate all the folks who came on and talked with us today. Appreciate you being here. Without you, there's no point. So I appreciate it, and I'd love to hear your feedback, your questions, comments, thoughts. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. And if you've missed any portion of today's program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com, Stitcher, iTunes, all those things. Also, you can get the Rick Smith Show app on your smartphone. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow or